good. All right, well, let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. Actually, lead us in the pledge, please.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great. Hey, Danny, can you do roll call for us, please?
Member Moulton.
I am present with a smile on my face.
Oh, good to hear. Member Corbett. Member Hinton. Member Luna.
Here.
Member Kerner.
I'm here.
Vice Chair McAdon.
Here.
Chair Guanasso.
Present. So it looks like we have 2 absences. 5 of the 7 are here, and therefore we have a quorum, and we can proceed. Let's go ahead and move to agenda item number 2, public comment. Do we have any public comment in Southern Nevada?
Seeing none.
No. Okay, any public comment here? Danny, do we know? Nobody?
Dope.
Okay. All right, so no public comment. We'll go ahead and move on to agenda item number 3, approval of the February 15, 2019 SPCSA Board meeting action minutes. This will be the time when the authority will review and possibly approve the action minutes from the February 15, 2019 authority board meeting. Has everybody had an opportunity to review the minutes from the February 15th meeting? Okay. If there are no changes to the minutes as written, willing to take a motion.
This is Member Moulton, Mr. Chair, and I move to accept an approval of the February 15th, 2019 board meeting minutes.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Member McAdon, I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion. We have a second. Do we have any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Member Kerner here. Since I was not at that meeting, I'm abstaining from that vote.
Okay, let the record reflect that Member Kerner abstained from the vote, and that leaves, that means the vote was 4-0 with one abstention. Okay, let's go ahead and open up agenda item number 4. This will be SPCSA staff reports. This will be the time when the staff will provide the authority board with updates regarding the work of the authorizing team, the work of the school support team, the work of finance and operations team, and legal. Acting Director Scroggins.
Good morning. For the record, Brian Scroggins. We will start with the authorizing team, and Mr. Moderson, I assume, will report on that.
Thank you, Mr. Scroggins, Mr. Chair, members of the authority. Good morning. Have a lot of exciting updates to share with you all from the authorizing team, and we're going to start with some performance framework updates from Dr. Ozdemir up in the north. He's been working ably to lead the development of our academic performance framework and the overhaul, and so I'd like for him to say a few words on that work and where it stands, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Guanasso and the member of the boards. We did our first working group meeting on March 7th, 2019. There were 11 attendees, including charter school leaders, SPCSA staff, and also 2 Department of Education members. There was really rich conversation. First, we looked at the NACSA academic framework, and also we discussed the following steps. We will meet at least once or twice a month. An upcoming meeting will be April 4th. We will keep going to update the board, but we are investigating to include indicators in our portfolio. Again, the next meeting will be on April 4th, 10 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. Is there any questions from any board member about the development and the work that's being done on the academic performance framework?
Mr. Chairman, this is Member Moulton.
Yes, please, Member Moulton.
If I could just, and not a lengthy one, but maybe just a brief, what your main goals? What are you looking at achieving, Dr. Ozdemir?
Thank you, Selçuk Özdemir, for the record. Again, we have working groups. First of all, we did the listening session, and then we created the working groups for both academic framework and organizational. In academic performance framework, during the listening session, attendees mentioned we need to look at English language learners in more detail for our framework. Also, in SPCSA framework, we need to look at the geographical comparison. How our SPCSA schools doing when we compare that with the regular public schools. Also, we would like to investigate, to look for the diversity more, free reduced lunch, English language learners, and special education students. So our conversation is going around that. Again, as a first thing, NACSA has an academic performance framework. We looked at that in our March 7th meeting and look at the components. One of the important point, the working group and listening sessions, the attendees mentioned, we don't want to replicate the star rating. That's already there. The state is already measuring those proficiency, growth, all those different indicators. We want to add a different perspective for our framework. That's why we want to look at the VIDA test and in depth. Also, we're going to compare the proficiency rate in our geographical comparison with other public schools versus SPCSA. Thank you.
Member Moulton, thank you. That helps.
Okay, hearing no other questions, what do we have next, Director Moderson?
Thank you. I'd actually like to jump down to the 6th bullet point, just so we stay in the SPCSA performance framework. So we just talked about the academic component. I'd like to jump down to the organizational component, Mr. Chair, if it's all right with you.
Yes, please.
All right, I'll turn that over to Mr. Dang, who will report out on that work.
Thank you, Director Moderson. Chair Guanasso, Vice Chair McAdin, and other members of the board and other stakeholders in the charter school community, good morning. My name is Mike Dang. As manager of the organizational performance and financial performance frameworks for the SPCSA, I'm here to provide a brief update of our project to revise the organizational performance framework. As Mr. Dr. Ozdemir just mentioned, his focus is on the academic performance framework. We are also focusing, as you know, on the financial performance framework, and on this section, the organizational one, which focuses on organizational and operational compliance with federal and state laws and with the contract terms. And so our goal is to revise or finish development of the organizational performance framework, the way in which we review the compliance essentially and the processes of the schools. We've had a number of listening sessions also, and have now, after taking comments from the charter school leaders, we've focused now to start working groups. As Dr. Ozdemir mentioned, we've had our first working group meeting this past Tuesday, excuse me. And in that, what we are doing now is we've given the charter school leaders the opportunity to weigh in as we develop the organizational performance framework. We are mindful of the legislators and their reminder to us that we are, of course, the regulators and not the regulated. And we look at this as similar to political bodies when they take comments as they're developing things. So that's the attitude we've taken towards this, calling for comments from the community. That said, we have a number of documents that we've shared with the community, the charter school leaders, which they've already had, because for the most part they've been in compliance, of course, with laws, federal and state laws. But what we do have is quite an abundance, if not an overabundance, of different organizational performance framework documents, such as, the legal compliance questionnaire. That is an organizational performance framework document. So we have the NACSA performance framework, organizational performance framework, as our foundation document, because it's a well thought out and well written framework. And then what we're doing is using that as a foundation, and then we are looking at what we already have with the SPCSA's performance framework and with other performance frameworks out there. We're looking also at our reporting requirements manual, what's in there, at what we collect in Epicenter, and looking also at the legal compliance questionnaire. So again, we have an abundance of documents, and what we're trying to do is thin through those to eliminate the duplication and replication. You probably heard that a number of schools over time have commented about the duplication that we've got, the unnecessary duplication. So perhaps the biggest work is to thin out these things, to eliminate the redundancies, and to get a streamlined compliance tool that'll help us to review and ensure the compliance of the charter schools. That concludes my report. If there are any questions or comments, happy to receive them.
Yeah, I think I did have a question. With regard to complying with different state laws, including PERS contributions, does our organizational framework take into account whether or not our schools are contributing to PERS?
For the record, this is Mike Dang. Chair Guanasso, that is one of the express things we have discussed to make sure that reviewing and ensuring compliance with pension laws in Nevada are being fully complied with. So that is an intentional part of our final organizational performance framework.
Okay, and this question of PERS compliance came up in some recent meetings, as I'm aware. Was there any, do we know how our portfolio is performing relative to complying with Nevada law regarding PERS contributions? Is our portfolio in compliance?
Mr. Chair, Mark Motion for the record. We believe our portfolio is in compliance with those regulations. I am aware, and I would ask, Mr. Herrick may want to add more to this, but I would note that the only two issues I'm aware of with PERS are for our two schools that are currently or have been under receivership, and those are being dealt with through the receivers, Mr. Kern and Mr. Hanel. Other than that, we are, all the information we have leads us to believe that our schools are in compliance.
Ryan Herrick, thank you, Director Moderson. Our both Chapter 388A as well as our charter school contracts between us and all of our schools require our schools to comply with all state and federal laws and regulations related to charter schools. Those would include anything related to PERS and whatnot. The issues as it relates to the two schools that are under receivership, I don't believe that those were non-payment into the system or whatnot. It was, I believe, historically there's been one or two times where they were late on payments or something like that, but I do not believe there's any with those two schools that they're not paying into the PERS system or anything like that. So just minor bumps in the road historically, but I believe that all of our schools are current.
Thank you for that. Well, it sounds like we're making, Vice Chair McAdoo.
Melissa McAdoo for the record. Maybe when the receivers, when they come before us for their updates again, maybe we could specifically ask them to just address where they're at with, I agree, if my memory serves, they are caught up with PERS, but maybe they could just address that the next time they give their updates.
And I believe Mr. Kern is scheduled for April to report out on Quest. So, and I'm not sure when Mr. Hanel is scheduled for his next quarterly report, but we can certainly add that to the topics for them to report out on.
Mr. Chair, this is Member Moulton. I'll just make a comment here because it's one of the questions I am asked almost inevitably when I discuss charters, especially with teachers that may be looking to retire and maybe come into or to begin teaching at a charter school is the PERS question. So I'm glad to hear that it's going well because I think that is a very big issue with employees. Thank you.
Thank you. It sounds like we're going to be able to monitor that effectively through the organizational framework. At least that's part of the intent of the framework, is to make sure that the schools in our portfolio are complying with all federal and state laws. Is that right, Mr. Dane?
For the record, this is Mike Dang. Yes, sir. That is the primary focus of the organizational performance framework.
And just to be clear, I just want to make sure we get the information directly from the schools, but there are a number of ways we get information, and one of the things you and your team are looking at is making sure we get rid of redundancies so we're not asking for the same information from schools 3 or 4 times.
For the record, Mike Tang, yes, sir. That is one of the focuses, one of the main focuses we have because we have quite a lot of performance framework, organizational performance framework documents already.
Great. Well, it sounds like a lot of good work's being done on those 2 frameworks. I'm glad we've got the financial framework in place, and I'm hopeful by June that we'll be able to install our academic and organizational frameworks. Is that our timeline is really by June to have both of those done? Yeah.
Mark Moderson, for the record, yes, that is the goal. We definitely want to have these expectations laid out for all of our schools so that they know where the bar is for the organizational compliance as well as the academic framework heading into the 1920 school year. So that is the direction we're moving forward, and so far I believe that those components are moving along on schedule.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, please.
Member Kerner here. If I may, sir, just going back to the PERS conversation for a moment. The PERS organization is set up that the employee pays half while the employer pays half, but because of contracts in the past with our teachers associations, there's been a significant shift in that where the organization now is paying both the employee share and the employer share, and that came about in lieu of salary increases years ago. I'm not sure exactly where that is, but in Washoe County, I think they may require teachers to pay 1% now, and I don't know what it is in Clark County. But when we take a look at this in terms of the report, I want to be satisfied that we're meeting all the obligations from both sides, if you will, not just that they're paying their half, if you will, they're paying the whole thing or whatever the employees teachers association agreement requires. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair McAdin.
Melissa McAdin, for the record, I do think there's a little bit of confusion, and so obviously we do want to have that cleaned up through the performance or through the organizational framework, because we don't necessarily have associations at any charter schools that I'm aware of. And for example, now teachers choose. So at Oasis Academy, they can determine, are they going to pay their 50% and the school's going to pay their 50%, or is the school going to pay the whole thing? And that's how it works now. And there are advantages to one way or the other. I'll just give you one quick example. Our military spouses who we hire that we know are only going to be there 3 years, they generally choose the option where they pay half and we pay half, because they know they're never going to get vested in the program, and it affords them some opportunities that I'm not an expert on to kind of access that money in different ways. And so I definitely think when we roll out the organizational framework, we need to have a little education piece on how PERS actually works now and what schools' obligations are, et cetera, et cetera.
Excellent. Well, if is there anything else from staff or any other board member?
Chair, this is Nora Luna. I do have a question. So,
please.
Thank you. This is something that I have spoken to Mark about, and so there's been at least one school that I know about that was charging the equivalent of tuition. I think they called it fees, but it was required when you submitted the registration. So how in this will we ensure that doesn't happen?
Thank you for that question, Member Luna. Mark Motion for the record. So we are currently enforcing all Nevada regulations related to any tuition or fees, which again by reg are not allowable. So we monitor that through adverse complaints as well as making sure that websites and handbooks are up to date. To your question more directly, we will continue to monitor that through the organizational framework. There will likely be an item or two that will basically verify that websites, handbooks, both student and parent, do not have anything that would be questionable related to those regulations, and that monitoring will continue under the framework. And when I would assume that there may be points awarded for compliance, maybe points subtracted for non-compliance, but that's definitely the place where this will be included.
Thank you.
And with a non-compliance issue like that, it wouldn't go through our normal intervention ladder. Wouldn't we want to send a letter advising Mr. Herrick that they immediately comply with the law, that there wouldn't be a lot of grace period for something like that, right?
Ryan Herrick. So just a little background, Member Luna and members of the board. So I've been with the authority for about a year and a half now. Director Moderson came on the month after I did, and as part of our compliance and oversight function, which has been the topic of several hearings lately and whatnot, we have ramped up our enforcement as the agency has grown in regard to organizational things like volunteerism that you know about, that we've reported out, and then this issue of tuition or supply fees or whatnot, that actually came out of that volunteerism discussion. So as we started looking at schools that had mandatory volunteer requirements, which are not allowable, we also saw some schools that were charging supply fees and whatnot. And so now we've turned to that issue. And to your point, that wouldn't necessarily follow our intervention ladder in terms of a notice of concern or whatnot, because those are non-allowable violation of free and appropriate public education and whatnot. And so we are actually currently, Director Moderson and I, this week are speaking to a couple of schools to figure out what they're charging, why they're charging, and whatnot to sort those issues out.
Any other questions from any other board member? I think these once we have the framework in place too, it'll give us an easier way to monitor all of these issues, so that we can be assured that the schools are in compliance with all relevant federal and state laws.
And just to bookend that, Member Mackinnon spoke last week to the legislature about lottery issues she had at her school that she worked with staff to figure out, and we've worked with schools on those issues, again, the volunteerism, and now this issue of fees. So I think there's a common misconception that all we do in terms of accountability is look at academic performance in the fall, but this is a year-round, consistent oversight function, that the authority provides, and again, in regard to free and public education, and making sure that our schools are complying with, all statutes, regulations as they relate to public schools.
Thank you for that. Well, it's great. I really appreciate these reports, because I don't think as a board we would know all of this information unless you all were reporting in the way that you have. So thank you for taking time to put this information in your reports, and thank you to the staff for all the work you're doing to revamp our academic and organizational framework. Unless there's any more questions, Director Moderson, please proceed.
Thank you. The next update is actually going to be back up to Dr. Ozdemir, who's going to provide you all with a brief update on the Nevada School Performance Framework, or the NSPF. The NDE staff has made some small, I believe it's 1 or 2 small changes for the 18-19 reports, which will be released in the fall. And so we wanted to bring you all up to speed on that work so that you understood those changes. And if you had any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Chair Gunaso and the member of the boards. Selçuk Özdemir for the record. I'd like to give brief updates on the revision of NSPF, known as star rating. Nevada Department of Education planning to implement some improvements for 2019 NSPF reporting period. There are 3 main areas NDE identified and will be updating NSPF procedures. They are refining data collections and analysis, the process to maximize the number of students represented in the accountability ratings. The second one is rating more schools that have not been rated in previous rating cycles due to low N counts, unique grade configurations, or focus on special populations. And the third one, reviewing calculations for some NSPF measures to ensure closer alignment with the requirements of the ESSA, which is Every Student Succeeds Act. There are really technical details. I'd like to give updates without too much technical details. So here are the 2019 revisions. The first one is the definition for year in school, called YIS. The definition of year in school was revised to more closely align with ESSA partial attendance requirements, which state that a student must be in attendance at given school for at least half of the school year for his or her results to be included in the school's accountability rating. For example, for SPAC, it's 120 days. In other words, student was enrolled in a given school for at least 120 school days between the first day of school and April 15 of the current school year for the results to be included in school's accountability calculation. And he is making these changes to basically, this will simplify the calculation process and will improve the consistency across the state in the interpretation of which students meet year in school requirement. Second revision on the 95% participation requirement. To comply with ESSA requirement that the denominator for calculating proficiency be the greater of 90% of all students or the number of students participating in assessment. This calculation methods will impact proficiency rates for schools and subgroups not meeting the participation requirements. The third one is the revised participation penalty structure. A new participation penalty methods will be implemented in 2019. As we know, the first year the school does not meet the 95% participation requirement, either at the school level or for any subgroup, a warning will be indicated to school's rating report. If the school doesn't meet the participation requirement for the following school year or any year thereafter, the following flat penalty structure will be applied for each year based on the number of subgroups. So if one subgroup flag triggered, it'll be 1 penalty point. 2 flags, 2 points, 3 flags, 3 points, so forth. 6 plus flags is 6 points. So it's not going to be all academic achievement. 6 points, the participation penalty will be the maximum. Last but not least, the revision also on rating all public schools. This will address the unrated schools. As you recall, there were a number of schools that were not rated in September 2018 NSPF rating. Overall, these schools were schools that had insufficient N size, like small schools with less than 10 records, or lack of assessment or growth data. So small schools with less than 10 records, if required measures for rating, data will be pooled over a number of years to calculate rate for each schools. Schools with a continuous lack of assessment growth data, for example, in the state there are K-through schools, K-3 schools. A feeder approach will be utilized to combine that data for the schools, and NDE will work individually with the districts that have these kind of schools in. I think the most critical point here is we are working with the school support team, so all these changes goes to our schools, so they are aware of these changes for the upcoming NSPF. And there's also a couple pages technical documents we're going to share with our schools. So we want to keep that communication open, so all our schools, they're aware of these changes, and they're going to be rated on these new indicators. This concludes my updates. I would like to answer any question you may have.
Yes, Dr. Osmer, on that last point about schools being informed, I think in previous years there's been a lot of consternation about what schools know or what they don't know. How can we be assured that the schools in our portfolio have the information they need so that they can make sure they're in compliance with what the department is going to be using to evaluate and score them?
Selçuk Özdemir for the record. Again, we have school support team, Lisa and Sarah. We are there's regular technical assistant meetings. Our schools are aware of that, and every technical assistance meeting we are inviting our schools to attend that, and the updates these changes on those meetings. Also through email we send, especially for the participation. As you know, Mr. Chair, we have some schools received participation warning and participation penalty last year. We just want to make sure all schools, but especially those schools, are paying attention to those participation penalties, so we are not going to receive the same warning or penalty this year.
Thank you, Dr. Osmer. Maybe one thing we might be able to do, and we can talk about this maybe as a part of our agenda setting, is that last year you did an excellent presentation on the NSPF, so we would understand how the NSPF works and what goes into those ratings. Maybe we can move that up a little bit earlier as another way to educate schools on what we need, or what's needed of them. If it's on our agenda and we have a presentation on it like we did last year, that might be helpful. Vice Chair McAdoo.
Something else that might be really helpful is if you just make it a compliance requirement in Epicenter, like a one-pager that you have to print out and you have to sign and your board chair has to sign, or just the school leader, whoever you want, but that just kind of highlights. I mean, obviously you can't summarize everything that they do in those weekly calls, but the mission critical stuff, you could maybe just do a one-pager, and then by signing, I acknowledge that I understand the changes that are forthcoming in this year's NSPF, and then it's just, then no one can say I didn't know.
Will do. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Member Moulton with a couple of questions.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Dr. Osmer, let me just do some reflecting so I understand. On the attendance requirement, did I hear that you would not be counted in the ratings or whatever if you attended less than 120 school days? And I maybe misunderstood.
Selçuk Özdemir for the record. That's the year in school definition. That's a great question. So basically, if the kids enrolled from the first day of the school till April 15, their year in school will be 1. It means their record will be part of the accountability report, which is star rating. If they are not enrolled in that period, their test will be still published, but they're not going to be part of the star rating.
Okay, then, Member Moulton, again, with just a clarifying question. So somebody comes in and registers and begins school at Thanksgiving time, at November. Would they be counted in the ratings?
Selçuk Özdemir, for the record, no, Member Moulton, his or her record is not going to count it in the star rating.
Okay, thank you. And then I have one other question, and this is another thing that, Member Moulton, again for the record, that people have come to me, and maybe at one point in time that you can, I'm still getting questions about when someone sends in their documentation for their star rating, and then they feel that it hasn't been correctly represented or documented. Is there a way for schools to receive back that documentation in time for them to adjust it or appeal it or something if they don't agree how it's been finalized? Are you getting my question? I'm not sure I'm really clear on it,
Yes.
but that's
No,
okay.
Actually, that's a great question. Selçuk Özdemir, for the record. Unfortunately, no. After the star rating release, NDE is not allowing any appeals or any data changes. But in the meantime, during the testing window, which is roughly from February till May 30th, schools has an access to eDirect, what they call, that's a tool to change any student level data. But after the star rating released, NDE will not gonna allow any appeals.
Okay, and I get that, but is there a time when they send in their documentation, and then do they have an opportunity to look at it as Mark's nodding his head, the way that we're going to release it? That if there was something they didn't agree with, that they could appeal it. Not appeal it, but question it, I guess.
This is Melissa Mackin for the record. Sheila, yes, there is multiple opportunities, actually. Okay. Multiple opportunities. I think there has been some confusion in the past because timelines maybe haven't been communicated because they set very finite windows. It must be done between now and now. Mm-hmm. And I think where we've had hiccups, those timelines weren't communicated for whatever reason. But there is a lot of opportunity. You have to go through and validate every single student, and you look at everything from are they correctly marked FRL? Are they correctly marked IEP? Are they correctly marked ELL? Are they 1 year exited ELL? Were they ever homeless? Were they ever in foster care? I mean, you are validating. You have to go through each kid and check a little box that says, yep, this is right. Yep, this is right.
Thank you. That helps. Thank you, sir.
Just to follow up on the attendance issue, what if there's intermittent absenteeism that brings the student in question below the 120 days? Would that student qualify or be counted against the accountability for the school? So throughout the school year, they miss a week here, a week there, and then they fall below that 120-day threshold. How are those students counted?
Selçuk Özdemir, for the record, yes, that's counted in. That kid's record will be part of the NSPF star rating. The two things, first of all, there's a chronic absenteeism indicator, as you know. The schools will get penalized for that also, but also if that kid's within that period, his or her record will be counted in the star rating.
And then one final question with regard to our virtual schools. How are we measuring attendance for our virtual schools? I know we've talked about this before, but if you could refresh our memory on how we count attendance for our virtual schools, that might be helpful as we move into these new rules with regard to the NSPF.
That's a great question. Thank you, Chair Gunaso. Selçuk Özdemir, for the record. That's one of the gray area we've been talking with the NDE. As you know, in a virtual school, the kids should log in to the system to watch the online class or do their classwork. So that login information kept by the schools, and they communicate with the NDE to be able to see what's the attendance in that particular days or school year, so they can keep track of the attendance of those kids.
Thank you for that. And then, I think I'll leave my questions there. Any other questions from any other board member? All right, Director Moderson, please proceed.
Thank you. Our next update is regarding site evaluations. There's a lot of good news to share here as we are remaining on schedule with our plan, communication, and goal to complete half the portfolio by the end of April. So I'll turn it over to my colleague, Ms. Kinney, to give you all an update on that schedule, what has been completed, and kind of some trends we're seeing.
Good morning, Sandra Kinney for the record. As Mark said, we have completed quite a few site evaluations, so we actually have 9 completed so far since January 22nd, and there's one more on the books for tomorrow. So by the end of the week, we'll have 10 completed, and then there are 6 more left for March 26th through April 25th. On average, the team has completed 1 site evaluation each week since we began them on January 22nd, with some weeks having 2, and then in our final scheduled week right now in April, we actually have 3. So we'll be on a site evaluation Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of that week. And part of that was to accommodate all of the spring break schedules over the next month. So some of them are a little bit tighter weeks than others. Also, by end of day, Mr. Chair, you'll have 2 completed reports in your inbox with 2 more by the end of the week. So those are ones that will also go out to the chair of the board of the school as well as the school leader, and then to our board chair. And as I mentioned at a previous board meeting, we're still seeing some trends portfolio-wide. There are definitely some specifics to each of our school campuses in terms of great things that are happening, trends that we see within the school, as well as some recurring trends around opportunities for growth. But portfolio-wide, there remain 2 that we really have seen repeatedly. One specifically that's positive is the culture at the school. Parents, staff, students, everyone loves their school. They feel that the common theme and phrase that we've heard from a lot of stakeholders through focus groups is that it has a family feel. And so people really like the choices that they have made and where they have enrolled their students or where the students themselves are enrolled. And one thing that we're pushing schools to do is connect that culture to have an impact on the to increase in student achievement. So a trend that we've seen that we noted at the last meeting is that level of rigor still remains relatively low in terms of questions that are being asked during instruction, very much level DOK 1 or Bloom's taxonomy 1 or 2. So that's been a reoccurring theme, and so we want schools to connect that strong culture to help push them for that academic achievement. Mark likes to use the phrase, we're checking under the hood when we do these site evaluations. And so I was thinking about that metaphor around the car and, checking the engines. And so we have great culture in these schools, right? So everybody's sitting in the car, they feel comfortable, they've got the right music going, everybody's chit-chatting and having a real good relationship in that car. But at what pace is that car moving on the freeway? Is it going far enough that students are going to have some real achievement over the course of the year through the type of instruction that's happening, through the level of question and rigor that's happening? Or is it going to be like they're stuck on the 405 in LA and they're moving very tiny steps over the course of the year? So that's where we're really pushing schools to think about that culture and instruction connection, really leveraging that strength of culture to push more around the academics. And then along the trends that we've seen portfolio-wide as well is around governance training. We've seen that board members are not really entirely owning their roles and responsibilities, and in part, many of them have said that's a lack of because of a lack of training. And so we're pushing schools to make sure that boards are not over-reliant on back office providers or any external partners and really owning their responsibilities as board members, because the board members are the ones that are ultimately legally and fiscally responsible for the for everything related to the school. And so helping the board members collectively understand that responsibility. So those are the 2 big trends, the culture with the connection to rigor and instruction, and then governance training for board members. And I'm happy to answer any questions related to site evaluations.
Can you just repeat how many evaluations have we completed to date?
We've completed 9 as of right now since January 22nd, and we have 1 more for tomorrow, and then we have 6 more over the course of the end of March through the end of April. But as of right now, we've completed 9, and again 1 tomorrow, so by end of day tomorrow, 10.
So if we have 31 charter holders, that it would appear that we will have had by the end of April half of our schools that have received a site evaluation, right?
That is correct.
And then, just to be clear, the work product that we should expect from the site evaluations would be the written report, and I'm going to receive 2 of those today in my inbox. Is that right?
That's correct. So we have created a time frame that allows us within 3 to 4 weeks to get a draft of our report to schools, and that's solely so that they can have an opportunity to write any type of response for entry into public record. And so we give them a week to write that response in response to our draft report. It also gives them an opportunity to ask any questions before the report becomes public. And so then we have another turnaround time. So from the site of about a week. And so from the site evaluation to the final report, we've built in to be about a 4 to 6 week schedule. So yes, by the end of today, you will have at least 2 final reports that will likely have responses attached to them. And by the end of the week, you'll have 2 more.
Excellent. And then, would it be possible to have a summary of the report you gave today along with the 2 completed reports? Could we send those to the legislative committees that have asked questions about our site evaluations to let them know, our progress to date and the fact that this work, which is of concern to them, is getting done, and it sounds like getting done not only quickly but effectively?
Chair Guanasso, Ryan Herrick for the record. A little bit later in the staff report, we'll be talking about the recent budget hearing that we had before the Joint Committee of the Assembly and the Senate, and we received 14 follow-up questions, and one of those questions detailed, asked I believe 7 or 8 sub-questions regarding the site evaluation process and whatnot. So those responses will be due at the end of this week. And so a lot of this information that Ms. Kinney is detailing this morning will be included in that report.
Oh, great.
And Mr. Chair, just to answer your other question, we have talked about down here and with Mr. Herrick about including one of the reports that you'll receive today as an entry to the committee as well.
I think that's an excellent idea, because when we were before the IFC a few months ago, I thought we did an effective job of demonstrating. We laid out a schedule, and then we also provided the workbook that you all developed that explains how a site evaluation is done. And then since that time, my understanding is that there was comprehensive training given to the teams that are doing the site evaluations, followed by an execution on the schedule that we had laid out. And now we've got 9 of those completed, with 6 more to go before the end of April, right?
So 7 more including tomorrow, so 10 after tomorrow, and then 6 more. But yes, to your comment around the training, the staff has completed about, and Mark, correct me if I've got, about 20 hours of training. That included several days prior to executing on these evaluations in January. And 2 weeks ago, we had another half-day training to realign, to help each other answer some questions, and to basically course correct on some trends we were noticing internally, to make sure that we were all on the same page, and also to validate each other, because these have become quite a lift and we all have other responsibilities and tasks on our plate. And with a team of 5 conducting all of these, it has been a little bit more time consuming than I think we initially thought. And so we did have that training just to, like I said, realign and support each other on specific questions that we had all come up with, because the team of 5 and authorizing, all of us have completed at least 1, with some of us completing a few more than others just based on capacity and honestly location. We've tried to minimize budget constraints and try to keep the travel to a minimum. And so with most of our schools down here, the Vegas team has been doing a little bit more of the lifting, but we have had tremendous support from the Carson City Reno staff as well.
Well, let me just say from my perspective, the team, you and the team working with you on these evaluative site visits are doing an extraordinary job. And I think it would just be criminal on our part if we weren't letting people know the extraordinary work you're doing. It's one thing to do the work. It's another thing to then make sure that everybody knows that the work's getting done. And so I appreciate the report to us, but let's get this information into the hands of folks who have been questioning us on these issues so that everybody knows about the good work you're doing.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, this is Member Moulton with just one question and then a couple of comments. Ms. Kinney, when you talk about rigor, I mean, that's a problem in almost every educational institution that I know of. Is there a way that you check on the data analysis and then the application of any changes to that data in your site visits?
So in our site evaluations, we can't do a check after the fact unless we're going back in, which I don't think too many principals would appreciate us coming back in a few weeks down the line. But what we do is in our classroom observation, and on average, we're conducting about 13 to 15 observations between the two of us each day or each site evaluation. And so what we're specifically looking at is the instructional delivery. And so this team has been trained on DOK. We've been trained on Bloom's. Those of us that have background in teaching and administration, we know those things. And so what we're looking for specifically is the engagement levels of students, but specifically the questions that are being asked. And so when we talk about rigor, specifics around the majority of what we're seeing are very much recall or factual questions. It's choral responses. It's also thumbs up if you agree, or the teacher saying, so the answer I came up with is 18. Is that right? And so it's not the students producing the responses or producing the explanations of how they found those answers. It's the teacher doing really the heavy lifting with the, I don't want to sound offensive, but really the most simplistic way of asking students if they understand or given that response. So it's very much true false. It's thumbs up, thumbs down. It's the who, what, where of a story. Who said this in the story? Okay, so it was Fudge, Super Fudge, but what did his brother say? But there's no going into, well, why do you think the author had that character say that? What is the evidence for why you feel that that's why the author? There's no getting at the analysis, the explanation, anything beyond the factual recall.
And just to comment, that just takes great professional development by master teachers, and it's a concern. Then let me just mention something on governance. This is something that I've worked with my entire educational career, if you will, and then serving on a board of a charter school among great people, but many of them, especially the parents that are on that committee, have not ever done anything like this before. And I think governance training is absolutely necessary. And for them to realize, especially if you've got a strong overseer, that these members are educated. And I appreciate CSAN and the work they're doing, and I just want you to know I testify to people the importance of governance training, so I won't belabor that, but thank you for your comments and your presentation.
Thank you.
On the issue of governance, besides the evaluative site visits, do we have any other opportunity to check in on the governance? Is that something that would appear in our organizational framework as well?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chair. Mark Motion for the record. Yes, there are a number of governance checks, if you will, that are included in the organizational performance framework, including are boards properly constituted? Are they following the open meeting law? Are they posting their notices in accordance with Nevada statutes and regulations? So yes, there are definitely multiple checks that occur on that front. And then the site evaluation really allows us to sit down with the governing boards to hear about what's going well, what's not going well. And I will applaud. A lot of them are being very transparent and saying, I need more training, or I just started on this board and I didn't have an orientation. That's exactly the kind of things that you'll read about in these reports, because that is, as Ms. Kinney highlighted, that is really critical to their role. And we want to make sure that they are actively engaged in the ongoings of the school. So you'll see that highlighted throughout some recommendations.
And in the case with one of our receivers and kind of a legacy school issue, I think one of our receivers is actually suing the board for not exercising appropriate governance. Is that right?
Ryan Herrick, for the record, I believe actually suing two separate boards at two separate schools.
Yes, the reason why I bring that up is because it underscores a point that was made earlier, and that is that ultimately it's the board that is legally responsible for the performance of the school. And so I'm glad that message is getting across to the boards through these evaluative site visits, because I think it's something that just needs to be repeated often so that people understand that it's the board that holds the contract, and it's the board that's responsible for compliance with the contract, and it's the board that's responsible for making sure that the school under their charge is complying with federal law, state law, and all the terms of the contract that they have with us. So I appreciate that that's happening. I had one last question.
Chairman? Oh,
yes,
ahead.
please.
I just have one when you're done, Mr. Chair. Go ahead.
I was wondering, as we've been talking about evaluative site visits and the work that we're doing, does anybody know, do traditional public schools have to go through this sort of process with their school districts? That is, does Washoe County or CCSD, do they send teams of people to all of their schools to do evaluative site visits and provide reports like the ones we're required to do?
Sandra Kinney for the record. I've not worked in CCSD, but I have coached teachers in CCSD through Teach for America, and having worked in a different traditional district. I think it varies from the district, and I think it varies on the needs of the school. So if perhaps a school was a recurring 1- or 2-star school, they might have teams go in more frequently than they would if a school was perpetually a 5-star school. But having not worked in CCSD or in any of the other districts in Nevada, I can't really answer that question.
Does anybody know the answer to that question?
Ryan,
that came up actually in a committee meeting the other day. Yeah, so.
Ryan Herrick for the record. This, you're correct. This issue came up in committee meeting, and Ms. Fiden and I have looked into this a bit to kind of try to compare and contrast the oversight and accountability that the SPCSA undertakes in regard to our sponsored schools as compared to what districts do. In our initial research, we've kind of come up with there are a number of statutory annual reporting requirements that traditional district schools undergo, as do our schools. There's also monitoring and oversight that the districts are statutorily or regulatory required by regulation to do. But we have not found anything that comparable to site evaluations that we're doing, and that's not to say that the districts aren't in their schools as much, but this issue of a site evaluation and our oversight is a little different than what districts perform.
Mr. Chair, Member Moulton for the record, and I have had quite a bit of experience down here, and there are oversights by administrators in the district, but I have to tell you I'm impressed with what we're working on and the 3 areas of our coverage. And I wanted to make one other notation on governance training, and that is the financial aspect, because I don't believe many of us, as we sat on boards, realize that you're dealing with millions and millions of dollars and the responsibility that you have. So when we do any governance training, I think we need to have that fiscal, Mr. Dang. I don't know if I don't know. So let me just make that comment that it needs to be not only political and doing the right things and the meetings and those kinds of things, but the fiscal responsibility. Thank you.
And if I may, Member Moulton, Mark Moterson for the record. So I think one of the things that we're seeing as a staff is the need to inform our schools about opportunities to train themselves and who can offer that training and who may be the appropriate experts. And so some of our long-term recommendations are of that vein. And then if there are other more pressing issues, such as we find out the board maybe only has 3 or 4 members and is right above that threshold, that's something that we will actually recommend, like, you need to take action on this within 30 days and we will check up with you. So I think that there's usually two lanes. One is how do we help inform boards about opportunities that they can receive training, and the other one is we're directing a school to take action immediately.
With regard to governance, I know that the EMOs play a role in identifying and recruiting board members. Has there been any work with those organizations to make sure they understand the importance of having strong boards?
Sandra Kinney for the record. I have not specifically worked with any of the folks from the EMOs, but I did have a principal, we did have a principal reach out. They were looking for new board members, and so I shared that with the Teach for America core members and alumni here in the region. There's more than 300 alums affiliated with the organization here, that many of them are still in the district, and so that was shared out on the social media websites, and I know there were a few folks that were interested, but that is the extent to which we have helped or supported. It's more of passing along the message as opposed to assisting with recruitment. And then I think Mark, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but he may have been working a little bit with Academica on some things related to that, but my scope has not been with the EMOs.
Mr. Chair, this is Member Moulton again. I'm sorry, a thought just came to me when you said that Teach for America. I believe that, you know, how you and Mark and I have kind of talked about how to integrate. What better way than to have an educator? They can certainly be an educator here at CCSD or any other district school, and to be a part of a charter school. I think maybe that's a way to network, to bring those, our two philosophies of great education together. So just
Sandra Kinney for the record. Agree, Board Member Moulton, and I actually conducted a training at one of their all-cores last October in a very general, broad, like, here's what it means to be a board member. Here are some resources for you second-year teachers if you're interested in serving on a board in the region. And so I think finding, as you and I and Mark have discussed in terms of those integration efforts, I think that is a really good way to tap into the teachers within the district who are interested in exploring their leadership skills while staying in the classroom, but also gaining a broader perspective of charter schools or of fiscal services or of governance.
Chair, this is Nora Luna. So over the years, thank you, we have talked about either trying to bring more training or offering it. We went as far as, I even got some quotes from different organizations on board training. And I don't remember if it was the lack of resources, you know, time and money, or if it was our philosophy of whether that's the role of this body to do that training, but it has been an issue. And, you know, like I said, I've even we had some models that we were talking about with getting quotes and how we would deliver it, and then even recruiting board members or helping schools recruit board members. But, you know, I don't know if there's what the thought is on our role for that. And, you know, I mean, I know you all are already stretched and then having the resources to do it, but.
Mr. Herrick.
Member Luna, Ryan Herrick, based on your suggestion as well as some other comments, Ms. Quiros and I reached out to Opportunity 180 as well as the Gwynn Center, and the purpose of that was to see if they would do board training for the SPCSA, and that may work, but they've also told us that I don't know if they got a grant or how they did it, but at no cost to us, they'll put on it. I think it's extensive. It's a day or 2 day training, and they'll only do 3 boards at a time. But they have offered up to do training for our school boards. And again, it's the Gwynn Center and Opportunity 180. So Ms. Quiros and I are working on moving that forward. And again, the idea would be for this board, but to offer that to our schools as well.
And Mark Moderson, for the record, just to add on to that, I think we need to do a better job. It is incumbent upon authority staff to make our schools aware of opportunities. I think we need to avoid being prescriptive so as to say, you need to be at this training facilitated by this person, because I think that can create problems for us down the line. But I think we've seen the need to develop our menu of options, and I think that's something we plan to do more of in the months to come.
Well, great. Well, that's very enlightening conversation about the site evaluations and some of the things that you've discovered through that. Thank you for the report. Are there any other questions from any other board member before we move to the next item? Okay, great. Well, hearing that, I just want to say great work. I know this has taken a lot of time and a lot of effort to do well, and I know you've endeavored to not just do the work, but to do it excellently, and I just want to commend you all for the good work you're doing. But with that, let's go ahead and move to the next item, Mr. Moderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is just a quick update, or I guess the next two are just really quick updates. So first, I'll take the revolving loan program. As the board will recall, the State Public Charter School Authority has an account within the general fund administered by the authority to issue revolving loans, and the loans are for costs approved by the board of the charter school and identified in their application, and can be used for these purposes: preparing the charter school to commence its first year of operation, to improve a charter school that has been in operation, or to fund recruitment of teachers and pupils to new charter school facilities and the enrollment of pupils in those facilities. So I wanted to make the board aware of that, as our deadline for these applications is this Friday, and should we receive applications, we would bring recommendations to this body probably at the May 31st meeting. And one other point to note, that program is open to any school authorized by any sponsor in the state. So it does not have to be an SPCSA sponsored school. It can be schools authorized by Clark County, Washoe County, as well as the Achievement School District. And we have had a number of applicants, particularly from the Achievement School District, take advantage of this loan. So just wanted to give you all an update about what's to come, probably at the May 31st meeting, should we have any recommendations to present.
Thank you for that report on the revolving loan update. Any questions from any board member regarding that report? Okay, hearing none, please proceed, Mr. Motion.
Thank you. And my last update is just that we have, as this body will recall, one charter applicant currently in the application process. We received and were confirmed that we had a complete application at the end of January. That review is ongoing, and we hope to bring any recommendations to this body at either the April 19th or the May 31st meeting. We have an interview scheduled with this applicant next week, which will help inform that recommendation. But we are on pace to have that application reviewed. I know that agency staff, as well as this body, has received a number of questions about the backlog of applications, but we are doing, I think, a very, very admirable job in the timeline where we could have a recommendation to this body within no more than 4 months. So, and that's a great improvement from where we were maybe 18, 24 months ago. So I'm really proud of the work that we're doing as a team, and then also the work of our external reviewers. So with that, I think that concludes my remarks, but happy to answer any questions related to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to see that backlog really is no longer an issue. We're handling these applications timely and doing good work in the review. One thing I wanted to find out is, when's the next window for letters of intent for the next review period? What's that window again?
Thank you for that question. The window is the rest of this week. The deadline is Friday, March the 15th, and then that's the 120 days out from the next actually submission of an application, which is July 1 through 15. So anyone wishing to apply in the summer cycle needs to have a letter of intent submitted to us by the end of this week. And that form, it's a Google form. It should take no more than 10, 15 minutes. Is on our website and will be live through the end of the week.
And then have we received any letters of intent to date for the next window?
That was a good question, Mr. Chair. Mark Moderson for the record. I believe we have received a few, and I know we have quite a few. We've fielded quite a few questions this period from a number of folks, so I think we're expecting quite a few applications. I don't know if Mr. Peltier wants to weigh in on that, because I know he monitors that pretty regularly.
Thank you, Mark. Danny Peltier for the record. Currently, we have received 11 letters of intent right now, with a few days left in the application notice of intent window.
Oh, that's good news. So people got the memo from last cycle that they need to get their letters of intent in on time, right? So that's good. Did the school that had that we had considered their late letter of intent and rejected it, did that school ultimately apply during this window, or file a letter of intent, I should say?
Danny Peltier for the record. No, they have not submitted a notice of intent yet, but they still have a few more days to do so.
All right, thank you for that. Okay, well, that'll conclude the reporting from the authorizing team. Next up, the school support team.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brian Scroggins for the record. Lisa Zerbicki from the school support team will give our report today.
Yes, please proceed.
Good morning. Lisa Zerbicki for the record. So, and I actually have our other colleague, she's here as well, Sarah Jorgensen, is here in Vegas this week. So going over, it's a three-part kind of focus points with the school support team. We divide it into three sections: site visits, conferences, trainings, and technical support. So I'll go over site visits first. This week between March 11th and March 15th, Sarah Jorgensen and myself, we will be going out to a handful of our charter schools, approximately 10 of them, throughout this week. And the purpose of our site visits, again, emphasizing us as a school support team, we want to discuss special programs at those schools, and that encompasses IEP, 504, English learner, and provide technical support to further guide school success with them. So that's our purpose of going out to these various schools. As far as going further within our conferences and training model, just last week, Ms. Sarah Jorgensen participated in Crisis Prevention Institute training for recertification in CPI. This training, as well as myself attending this training in April to be fully certified, because it's been a few years for myself, is to take and further help us support our schools as we are in the process of putting together it'll be school-wide portfolio training opportunities in the summertime. So that is something we are making sure we're fully trained, recertified, and so forth for those pieces to help just, again, promoting school safety and supporting their students in times of those needs. We also have other trainings related to, again, kind of more of our different platforms and data systems we use. Infinite Campus has a user group meeting in March, and that's for next week, in different parts of Nevada. We also recently are liaisons with what's called PIFE. This is on behalf of NDE, Nevada Department of Education. It's the Parental Involvement and Family Engagement Liaison. So Ms. Jorgensen and I will be attending a meeting in the very near future, sometime at the end of this month, to gain more knowledge and insight on that role, responsibilities, expectations, as representation of this type of liaison within our district meeting within our authority. Excuse me. Also, we another point of contact we have taken on is with gifted education. Gifted Education District Administrator meeting is coming up in April. Excuse me. And so again, this is another meeting. We attend the Special Education District Administrators meeting. So that's CETA, the acronym, and then there's GETA, the Gifted Education District Administrators meeting. And so we are the point of contacts, Ms. Jorgensen and I, for both of those meetings as representatives, and then information again that we push out to our schools or at trainings or professional developments as appropriate. So those are both in April and May. We also are planning to attend LRP's National Institute Conference in Orlando, Florida in May. A few of us within our agency, which LRP is based on the legal practices within special education on a nationwide level. Going further into technical support, we continue to facilitate parent concerns, providing guidance to charter schools as it relates to Nevada Department of Education reporting requirements. Some that are been in the mix on the horizon right now is the 5-year extended adjusted cohort graduation rate data validation for the class of 17-18. We are actually, in conjunction working with schools, making sure everybody's finalized and has that locked, ready to go, as today is the final submission date. Also, we've assisted our charter schools with DRC Insight, WIDA, and validations. Excuse me, again, a little dry spell there. Particularly with WIDA validations, that's the first closing window of WIDA validations was by Friday, the 8th. So we have just made sure everybody's wrapped up and good to go in that area as well during the testing season. Also, since Ms. Jorgensen and I, we are considered for the authority, the district test directors, DTD, district test directors, we've reviewed testing irregularity forms in a program that we use, and closely working with Nevada Department of Education, as this is a new space for us that we've been working on to review, and just part of that process and any communications that need to be completed with the school. Further, we've had many correspondences already with the schools, with the Nevada School Climate Social Emotional Learning Survey that's undergoing right now through between now until April, towards the end of April. So we've been helping them through that. That way they're completing that for their school students. And also the Civil Rights Data Collection Survey. That's another piece that we've made sure our schools have access and they are getting, have the necessary tools. And as we are gaining more new knowledge, this is a new area for us as well as we're learning about it. So, and I think that covers everything as far as, again, keeping in mind with the summative assessment window, it's open. It was open from 2/21, so February 21st, and then goes till May 22nd. So we are in the testing season. Do you guys have any questions for me?
Any questions from any board member?
Mr. Chairman, Member Moulton, just an observation. As I listen to all these reports come in and what we're all doing, I think we're getting really aligned for the LEAs. Maybe I'm wrong, but I really think that we will be prepared when and if all this takes place. Just a comment.
Thank you, Ms. Moulton.
Yeah, thank you for the report. Any other questions from any other board member? As always, the school support team's doing a great job. Appreciate the reporting.
Mr. Chair, Brian Scroggins,
yes.
For the record, just one other thing. The authorizing team and the school support team have had some conversations about the site evaluation process, and we'll be receiving copies of those reports also, and then our school support team will be following up with schools on the items that they can offer support in with additional training and technical support. So working cooperatively within the agency to help make those things happen.
Oh, that's a great point you raised, and I think it underscores something important, and that is how our regulatory and oversight responsibilities, how they relate to our school support responsibilities, and how those two roles complement one another. Is that a right understanding of both how support and accountability work within our agency?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair.
All right. Well, any other questions or comments or additional information? All right. Well, hearing none, we'll go ahead and close the reporting from school support team and move to the finance and operations team.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brian Scroggins for the record. Just briefly on the finance and operations team. And following up with the budget presentation that we were told we would get some questions, which Mr. Herrick referred to earlier. We did get about 14 questions. Again, clarifying the reserve account, cash flow needs, specific duties of the requested positions, site evaluations, and some other questions. Special thanks to Mike Dang from the authorizing team who kind of took the bull by the horns on those questions and went through and determined who within their agency could best answer those questions. And so we have had a couple of meetings over the last week or so to upload information into, I believe it's a Google Doc, and then we're going to actually have another briefing after this meeting to make sure that we have those questions updated, and then those will be submitted. Another thing also is I received a memorandum this morning from Audra Blackwell on our finance team that there is a interim finance committee meeting update on April the 4th. At that point, we are listed according to the agenda as an informational item, and I believe that it is probably just presenting and talking about the updated interim finance committee report that we sent in recently. So with that, again, I think Mr. Herrick, if he wants to go a little deeper into the questions, but I believe he shared those with you, Mr. Chair. But again, just various questions about, the new positions, and again, other things such as the reserve questions that they had.
And thank you for that report. I think we seem to struggle with our reporting to the interim finance committee. The last couple of times it's our presentations have raised more questions, I think, than they've answered. And so I think, as we do the written responses to the questions, I think that's important. I also think maybe reaching out to the chair of that committee and doing something similar to what we've done as we've presented AB 78 and actually having a meeting with the chair before the actual report so that we can be prepared for some of the questions and concerns the committee may have so that we can provide comprehensive and coherent answers, I think would be a good strategy. And then just make sure we're prepared for that meeting and the different questions that may come up. Maybe, if we can anticipate the questions that we may be asked at that meeting and be prepared to answer them. Whether it's through one person or a team of people that are at the ready. And I think that whoever's going to be presenting for the board, or not for the board, for the authority, probably should be there in the room. And so if there's additional information needed from some other person on our team, that person's on hand, in person, especially during the legislative session to address the committee face to face.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Herrick, we're going to talk more about the questions in a later agenda item. Is that right? No, this is the time. Did you provide do we have that for the board to look over, or was that just, is that still a work in progress, the answers to the committee's questions?
We did not provide those questions as part of the board packet. The responses to the 14 questions are due this Friday, and as Director Scroggins mentioned, we're working on those responses currently.
Okay. All right, any question from any board member about the finance and operations team's report? All right, hearing none, we'll go ahead and close that agenda item. We'll open up the legal report. Mr. Herrick.
Sure, Ryan Herrick. Only one agenda, one item to report on, and that's just I put the executive director search and recruitment as kind of a placeholder here in case there was anything we needed to do after Friday. But just to summarize, and particularly for member Luna, on Friday the board interviewed 5 highly qualified candidates for the executive director position. The board selected 3 names to be sent to the governor. Those are Rebecca Fiden, Mark Moderson, and Sammy Randolph. And I believe, Mr. Chair, you're in the process of drafting that letter to get to the governor shortly.
Yeah, that's correct. Based on our conversation, the board determined that it would be good if I sent a cover letter ranking the candidates and providing some rationale for that ranking. So I'm working on that, and we'll have that to the governor's office in the next couple of days. Okay, any questions for the legal team? Okay, hearing none. I probably should just say again, I mentioned this on Friday, but Mr. Herrick and the staff did an extraordinary job of shepherding us through the executive director search and recruitment process. And at every decision point, I know as board chair, I felt prepared, and I felt prepared to conduct meetings and to make decisions so that we could arrive at the place we're at now. So I just want to again say thank you to Mr. Herrick and staff for all the good work they did to help us come up with the best 3 candidates we could to send to the governor. So thank you. All right, that'll close agenda item number 4, and we'll go ahead and move to agenda item number 5. This will be the legislative update, the time when SPCSA staff will provide an update regarding the 2019 legislative session, and with respect to the following charter school bills, AB 78, AB 70, AB 168, AB 213, BDR 34, 392, and Senate Bills 57 and 89. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Herrick for a report on those pieces of legislation.
Good morning, Ryan Herrick for the record. A couple of housekeeping matters first. Last couple of meetings I promised the board that, staff would provide the board with updates regarding the legislative session, AB 78, other bills that affect either Chapter 388A, which is where our schools live, or other education bills. We're still working on that project, on that process and whatnot. And then for today, what I've done is I've kind of gone through and I've tried to find some bills that our schools I know are interested in, that CSAN is following, and I want to report out on that. But prior to doing that, I want to spend a few minutes talking about Assembly Bill 78, which, as the board is well aware, that is the SPCSA bill. And with me this morning is Rebecca Fiden from the Department of Education. And as you know, AB 78 is a joint collaboration between the SPCSA and the Department of Education in regard to some specific identifiable policy priorities, both for the SPCSA and the department. As part of the supporting materials, for this agenda item, I've provided 2 things. The first is a technical summary of the proposed revisions to AB 78, and the second is the actual proposed conceptual amendment. As I believe most of the board is aware, 2 weeks ago now, Ms. Fiden and I presented both this technical summary and the proposed amendments to the Assembly Committee on Education. As the board, I believe, is also aware, AB 78 is currently a 90-page, 81-section bill, and so what this technical summary and the proposed conceptual amendment is meant to do is to par that significant bill down to something that's a little more manageable. In doing that, if you take a look at the technical summary, we've kind of divided 5 specific identifiable policy priorities into 2 categories. The first category we're calling clear lines of authority and accountability. The proposed changes to NRS Chapter 388A in this regard relate to the SPCSA's LEA status, and in that regard, this has been an issue for some time for the authority. I think the position that the SPCSA has taken and the department has taken recently is we are the LEA, and what we're doing is making a minor change to 388A to clarify that. Originally, we had some different language in here, but because there's other LEA provisions scattered throughout the education code in regard to the ASD and school districts, we just mirrored that language, and so that's what it currently looks like. The second thing that we are, that this proposed amendment asks for, currently the SPCSA kind of has a grab bag of regulations that we are allowed to adopt, and they frankly relate to some very limited issues, such as our application, amendment, and renewal process. And then currently the Department of Education has wholesale regulatory authority. In other words, the department can adopt regulations related to anything related to education. So what we're asking for here is statutory authority to be able to adopt regulations related to anything in 388A and as it relates to SPCSA-sponsored public charter schools. The third thing that we're doing as part of this authority and accountability, there's been some calls, we've heard some calls recently for more accountability of the SPCSA, not of our schools, but of the actual agency. And so we're codifying some of the regulations as it relates to the annual reporting that we're required to do, annual reporting to the Department of Education. The other thing that we are doing is we are adding 2 new board members. As you know, currently the SPCSA Board consists of 7 members, 2 appointed by the governor, 2 appointed by the Assembly, 2 by the Senate, and 1 by CSAN. We are proposing that 2 more board members be added to be appointed by the State Board of Education. And again, this is AB 78 is a joint bill with the Department of Education, and by adding these 2 board members, we're also trying to solidify that connection between us and the Department of Education. The second category of these 5 kind of identifiable specific items relate to what we're calling equitable enrollment and access. There is currently a provision in NRS 388A, it's 453 sub 2, that allows our schools to, our schools, like any other public school, are required to provide special education services to students, and this provision allows the school, if it's unable to provide those services, to enter into an agreement with another charter school, another district, to essentially outsource those services. What we're doing in here, and we got some comments at the committee meeting a couple weeks ago, is we're trying to clarify that our schools are required to provide these special education services, and they can do that 2 ways. They can either do that essentially in-house, by hiring special education people to come in and provide those services. They can still enter into agreement with districts or other charter schools. But again, we want to make clear, because there seems to be some misconception in the public that public charter schools under some circumstances are not required to provide these services. And we want to make clear, as our schools full well know, that our schools are required to provide these special education services. With that, I want to turn it over to Ms. Fiden to present the last portion of these proposed amendments to AB 78.
Good morning, Rebecca Fiden, for the record, representing the Department of Education, Acting Executive Director of the Achievement School District. As we mentioned in February, there have been some discussions about the potential for moving the Achievement School District schools underneath the State Public Charter School Authority. So I'm going to talk through that proposal today. Before I do that, I will provide some brief context on the Achievement School District and kind of how we got to this proposal. So the Achievement School District was created during the 2015 legislative session to be one piece of the state's approach to improving underperforming schools. The Achievement School District is in effect a unique charter school sponsor housed within the Department of Education, and there are 2 types of achievement charter schools. First, we have what are called transformation schools, where an organization assumes operations of an existing low-performing school. There's one transformation school in the Achievement School District. In 2017, Democracy Prep assumed operations of the former Agassiz Prep, so that's an example of a transformation. Second, there are neighborhood options, where an organization adds a new school in a community with existing low-performing schools to provide an option or alternative. As an example, Futuro Academy opened in 2017 in a new facility near Canberra Elementary School in Clark County, which at the time had been a 1-star school from 2012 through 2017. Futuro provides an options for parents and families in that community. There are currently 4 achievement charter schools, 3 of which are neighborhood options, 1 of which is a transformation, again, all in Clark County, and currently serving over 1,500 students, 96% of whom qualify for free or reduced price lunch, 70% of whom are zoned to attend a 1- or 2-star school, and at full scale, these schools will serve over 2,600 students. While existing statute explicitly calls out the transformation school, neighborhood options are not explicitly defined in statute. So last summer, the department submitted a bill draft, which has been introduced as Assembly Bill 35, that was aimed at directly clarifying the neighborhood option schools and ensuring the sustainability of these schools and our efforts to provide options for parents and families in communities that don't currently have access to many high-quality options. As I shared briefly at the February meeting, over the last few months, we've been discussing the possibility of moving the Achievement School District under the State Public Charter School Authority. And at the bill hearing on Assembly Bill 78, I guess 2 weeks ago, we proposed just that. The intent being not only to ensure the sustainability of the Achievement Charter Schools for the students and communities they serve, but also enabling the work of the Achievement School District to contribute to the State Public Charter School Authority's focus on equitable access. Here's a brief summary of what we proposed. First, the proposal would transfer the existing schools under the Achievement School District to the State Public Charter School Authority. Second, the proposal would transfer certain responsibilities for the existing schools and any future schools to the State Public Charter School Authority. Currently, the Achievement School District really has 2 functions. First, the Achievement School District reviews performance of schools across the state and solicits community input to identify which communities would benefit most from an Achievement Charter School. The second responsibility is to serve as this charter school sponsor. And so under this proposal, the duties and responsibilities as serving as a charter school sponsor are the ones that would transfer to the charter authority. To be clear, in a future where there was a school transformation, the job of identifying what school would be transformed would live with the department. The department would go through the process of identifying low-performing schools, engaging the community, and identifying which school would be selected. The charter authority's role would be to serve as the sponsor once the school became an achievement charter school. So again, identifying where that split in responsibilities is and making sure that the sponsorship duties are the ones that are transferred to the charter authority. The proposal would also define certain requirements for neighborhood option achievement charter schools to serve as options for students zoned to low-performing schools, and add a requirement for all achievement charter schools to provide a program of free and reduced price lunch. Please note that all 4 of the achievement charter schools currently do. This would be a protection for future schools. In addition, in an effort to expand equitable access, the proposal would establish for a streamlined process for high-performing in-state charter operators to become approved to operate achievement charter schools in neighborhoods of high need, and it would give the SPCSA authority to establish regulations by which an existing charter school that is already sponsored under the SPCSA could apply to become a neighborhood option charter school. 2 additional pieces. We know that some charter schools in our state are in need of improvement. In addition to existing provisions that this charter authority is very familiar with that allow sponsors to reconstitute low-performing schools, the proposal would explicitly extend the eligibility of school transformation to include charter schools as an alternative accountability option. Effectively, this would ensure that all public schools, district and charter, are held to the same level of accountability. And then finally, the proposal would establish the requirement for an annual report on achievement charter schools. That's all.
So to bookend the conversation on AB 78, I know that was a lot of information, and the technical summary may be the kind of starting point for any questions that you have. You know, with the loss of the executive director of the SPCSA in November and then the resignation of Dr. Canavero in January, we've been playing a bit of catch up with this bill. And so in a perfect world, this report would have been brought to the board 2 or 3 or 4 months ago. I want to assure the board members in Las Vegas that Chair Guanasso and Vice Chair McAdam have been involved in all of the discussions related to AB 78. And so again, with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I'd also remind the board that we had substantive reports on these principles back in November and December, so nothing in the summary should really be a surprise to anybody with regard to the direction we were heading with AB 78. I'm personally relieved that we're able to simplify the bill. I think 90-plus page bill was overkill, and I'm particularly pleased that we decided not to seek subpoena power for ourselves in our proposed legislation, which is what was in the original bill. So I'm glad you all exercise good judgment and wisdom on how to edit that bill so that it was really aligned. And the thing I'm most pleased about is that what we're asking for is aligned with where we want to go over the next 3 years. It's aligned with, our desire to step into the LEA role that the department has determined we're responsible for. It's aligned with our need to have additional authority to better regulate the schools under our care. I think it's also aligned with some of the concerns that have been expressed in the public with regard to how authorizers are held accountable, and we welcome that kind of accountability. And if we're held to the same standards as other authorizers, and you can compare the work we do to the other authorizers in the state, I think we have a good story to tell in that regard. And then I think the merger of the ASD and the SPCSA really puts us in a great position to have another tool to reach underserved populations and to do it in a way that's innovative and responsible. And so I couldn't be more pleased with where the bill is at right now. And I just want to let the board know I attended the committee meeting before the Assembly Education, and I couldn't be more proud of both Mr. Herrick and Ms. Biden and the presentation that they gave, and then also the way that they answered the questions that were presented to them. And they had a lot of questions from a lot of different people, and they just did a superb job of presenting the bill, answering questions, and really demonstrating to that committee the level of professionalism and thoughtfulness that goes into the work we do here. And I'd be remiss to not mention Vice Chair McAdin. I think that she was the opening act for these two in many ways, and she gave a great overview. Her and her CSAN colleagues gave a great overview of charters that led up to the discussion of this bill, which I thought was very effective and really helped the committee understand what charters are, how we're performing in the state. And there were a number of questions that were asked by the committee, and I thought Vice Chair McAdin and her colleagues from CSAN, some of the school leaders from all over state did just a phenomenal job of answering those questions. So I really left that committee meeting feeling confident that those who are making decisions about what the next step is for charters in our state really understand the work we're doing and understand the direction we want to go. And ultimately, it's up to them as to whether they agree with us. But I think we're off to a good start and having a robust conversation about what's next for charters in our state. And so with that, I just had a couple of questions, and I'll turn it over to the board for some additional questions. I know that there was a proposed amendment from CCSD. Where are we at? What's like a summary of what they want us to do, and where are we at in our conversations with them?
So the Clark County School District proposed amendment essentially redlines 388B, which is the Achievement School District statute, in its entirety from the beginning to the end. So the amendment essentially eliminates 388B and the Achievement School District. The second thing that it does is it takes the language that we're proposing actually and takes those 4 existing schools and puts the 4 existing ASD schools under the SPCSA. So it essentially gets rid of the ASD in its entirety, and those 4 existing schools come under the SPCSA. We've been trying to schedule a meeting with the CCSD representatives, and given that last week was a little busy for us, that didn't happen, but I believe we're scheduled to speak with Clark County on Wednesday about that proposed amendment.
Great. And then there was another proposed amendment from the NSEA. Do you want to talk about that for a second.
That proposed amendment seeks to put a cap on both the number of charter schools that the SPCSA can authorize, as well as the number of students. It doesn't contain any specific language in regard to what that would look like. We will be reaching out to that group as well to discuss that amendment, but and I'm happy to take direction from the board, but the issue of caps is not in our proposed bill. That, in my perspective, that's a different bill, and so we're happy to talk with those folks about that issue and whatnot, but I would not see that being incorporated by the SPCSA into AB 78.
Yeah, with the CCSD proposed amendment, I think they reached out prior to the hearing and began conversations with both of you. And so I would just encourage you to continue those conversations. I wouldn't presuppose what the end result should be. I think we should focus on our objectives. What are our policy objectives, and make sure we preserve those. But whether it occurs all in 388A or, preservation of 388A and 388B with some modifications, I don't think we should get too hung up on the tent that it lives in, but just making sure that the stuff that we need in the tent is there to do the work that we want to do. And then with the NSEA proposed amendment, at least from my perspective, and I'd be interested to hear from other board members on this, I am strongly opposed to any attempt to cap charter schools in terms of either the number of charter schools that are under our authority or the number of students. I think we're doing an exceptional job in our space. There's always room for improvement, and we're demonstrating we're taking steps to make that improvement. But I think, with the kind of waiting lists that we have across the state for our form of education delivery, I think it would be negligent on our part to agree to any form of capping on our schools. But I'd be interested to hear from the two of you on both of those proposed amendments and the direction you are looking to go in.
Rebecca Fiden, for the record, I'll speak to the component related to the Achievement School District. Agree with your concept that the mechanism is less important than the content. And so we have already worked on some ideas, particularly based on some concrete feedback that was provided by the chair during that meeting for how to address some concerns. And so we hope to bring that to the table for the discussion with Clark County, as well as be open-minded about how we can find some middle ground and move a bill forward that is in service of the outcomes we're trying to achieve.
And then, in addition to those two proposed amendments and meeting with those folks, we've also scheduled a number of follow-up meetings with legislators from both the Assembly Education Committee as well as the Senate Education Committee. I believe we have a meeting scheduled with Senator Harris tomorrow. So we'll be discussing, follow-up questions that we both got at the Assembly hearing, as well as starting to meet with folks on the Senate side as well.
Any questions or comments from any board member?
Mr. Chair, this is Member Moulton, and I totally agree with you with your comments on the enrollment. I think it's very important, and we've heard from our community the importance of choice. So I agree with your thoughts and the comments by our presenters on both of those items. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chair, Member Kerner here.
Yes, please.
In addition to your comments, I was also at that presentation, and I think Mr. Herrick and Ms. Fiden did an excellent job. But beyond that, they actually approached this bill from a very ideal perspective, and that is they went and worked with the members of the committee prior to the meeting on a one-on-one basis to address any concerns they had, which made the presentation go much smoother. And I'm very optimistic about our bill. Thank you.
Ryan Herrick, just one final comment, and I'll probably raise this this issue when we get to the strategic plan as well. In terms of enrollment, waiting list, caps, and whatnot, we currently serve 42,000 students statewide. We have about 4,000 students that will come online this coming fall, this coming school year. In the last two application cycles, so in the summer and then the last winter cycle, this board didn't approve any new charters. But again, prior to that, we've got 4,000 students coming online this fall. The following school year, the 2021, we have another 500, I believe. And in addition to that, some of our schools that we've approved and opened, as this board is well aware, some of our schools don't open at K-5 immediately. They start with K-2 or K-3 and then build out. So we have some, what I'm calling inherent growth already built into our existing portfolio. Now with Argent closing, that was about 140 students that we'll lose. And then with Nevada Virtual Academy Elementary School, that's another 450. But I think when we talk about the strategic plan, we can talk, and I'm sure this board is going to be focused on strategic growth, but any effort to artificially cap or limit this board's ability to approve new schools, I can't imagine a world where that would where we would agree to that and not oppose that vigorously.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think it's important to impress upon those who would be making these decisions just how rigorous our process is. I mean, we're not just approving charter schools willy-nilly. They go through a thorough review process, and then as anybody who's paid attention to our meetings over the last couple of years will learn, we ask some pretty tough questions, and I know of at least one, if not two, applications that we've outright rejected, because they were not sufficient. So it's not growth for growth's sake. I like the word you use, strategic growth that makes sense given what we want to, where we want to see our portfolio go, and making sure that we're reaching a diverse student population in areas that are traditionally underserved. I know we've got a lot of work still to do there, but I would just impress upon the committee members and anybody else who will listen that our process is rigorous, and so it's caps would not serve students and families well, and they certainly would inhibit our ability to grow strategically in the areas that I think we need to grow in, and that's primarily in some of the underserved areas of our state. So, any other comments or questions?
So with that said, again, what I've done here is this certainly isn't a comprehensive list of education bills that affect, if you look at the agenda, that will affect our schools, but I've tried to pick a few of the more significant ones or issues that I want to talk about. And going forward, I've been talking to our friends at CSAN as well as some other stakeholders, because I think the more eyes we have at the legislature and ears to the ground, if we can work collaboratively with our partners, Department of Education as well, to kind of make sure that any significant bills that are working their way through the legislature I can bring up at future meetings. But having said that, again, I've listed a few, and I'm going to jump around a little bit here, and after each bill I'll kind of pause if there's any questions as it relates to these. So Assembly Bill 168 was heard last week, and what that does is for all public schools, and there's a specific provision related to our schools, but prior to any suspension or expulsion of a student, public schools would be required to apply what they're calling restorative justice principles. And what that means is prior to an expulsion or a suspension, there'd be non-punitive intervention and support, essentially counseling, other issues to try to avoid outright suspension or expulsion. There is an exception built into the bill for student safety and whatnot. And again, that bill is currently working working its way through the Assembly Education Committee. Are there any questions in regard to AB 168? AB 213, I've kind of listed here just as an exemplar of bills that are out there. So there's current law, which I didn't frankly know about. In the rural counties, students under 16, between the ages of 14 and 16, are allowed to get their driver's license at 14. And this bill would allow charter school students, wherever they live, to get their driver's license at 14. This bill, I do not believe has been set for a hearing, but I just wanted to raise this to kind of show the board, the various different bills that are out there right now. BDR 34-392.
Mr. Herrick, on that bill, who proposed that? Where did that?
I actually anticipated that question and pulled that up. That was, give me just a quick second.
Member Kerner, I think that was Mrs. Hanson.
So that was introduced by Hanson, Edwards, Hafen, Levitt, and Titus, and the joint sponsor is Senator Pickard.
And just so you know, this is Melissa Mackin for the record, Lee Boudreau at Ace High School is really the one that is pushing for that bill. They have a lot of issues. They're not one of our schools, but they have a lot of issues with transportation, and their sponsor will not provide them transportation for their kids to get to their school. So at first when I read this bill, I was like, this is insanity. And then once I had a chance to sit down and talk to Lee and understood all of her issues and why this is important for their school and there's a lot of regulations. I mean, if you're caught, you can drive to school and from school, and if you deviate from that at all, you don't get your license till you're 18. I mean, it is really restrictive and et cetera, so.
The next bill is BDR 34-392, and this is it provides for separate regulation of online public charter schools. This BDR has not been published yet, so there's just a placeholder, and that's why it doesn't have an assembly number yet.
And right now, if I understand it, of the 1,200 plus bills that have been proposed, only about 450 have been introduced to date. And so my understanding is there's going to be a huge bill dump in the next week to 10 days. So we'll likely see that BDR surface as a part of that larger bill dump.
I've listed Assembly Bill 70, which is a significant rewrite to Nevada's open meeting law, because that's important for not just this agency but our schools. And again, that's a significant rewrite. That's the Attorney General's bill, and two provisions that I have looked at. This board will be happy to know that it exempts training from the open meeting law, because that's always an issue of whether if staff provides the board with training, whether that has to be noticed and agendized and whatnot. And it specifically exempts that. The second thing that it does that will be helpful is it specifically defines supporting documents, because we always struggle with what we have to post, what we have to provide to the public, and I believe it defines supporting material. It's any document provided to more than a quorum of the board prior to the board meeting. So if there's documents that are provided prior to the board meeting or in preparation to a board meeting to just the chair or the vice chair, those would not be required to be posted. Any questions in regard to that?
No questions, just I anticipate there probably be other tweaks and changes. So as you monitor this bill, whatever gets passed, could we just plan on having like an updated open meeting law training so that we could make sure we understand what the changes are and how they affect what we do on a month-to-month basis?
Sure, and the original bill was a significant rewrite. And then similar to what has happened with us with AB 78, given stakeholder feedback, the Attorney General's office last week went through and redlined that bill that made additional significant changes to it. But as you know, last month I believe we had an open meeting law training scheduled that was for this board as well as for our schools. But I think what we'll do is just put that in our pocket, and then when this bill, whatever it turns out to look like, I can revise that presentation and provide it to the board.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
The final item is Senate Bills 57 and 89. 57 is the school safety bill, which I believe came out of all of these meetings that Governor Sandoval originally started in regard to the school safety committee and stakeholder input that Governor Sisolak has continued on. And I know there's been several hearings on that. And then 89 I listed because that's the Department of Education's omnibus bill. And frankly, I haven't looked too much at that because it's not limited to any specific issue. That's their bill that's doing a ton of cleanup and a ton of changes to the education code. But those are kind of some of the primary bills that we're watching. I actually spoke with our friends at CSAN this morning, and they listed out another couple of bills that we'll also add to our list. And then again, we're trying to come up with a way to provide the board with more regular updates. And then, of course, at all of the board meetings throughout the legislative session, we'll provide the board with similar updates.
Mr. Herrick, besides our bill, AB 78, do you anticipate that our authority will need to take a position on any bill, or that we should be prepared in that regard? Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, but what are your thoughts on that?
This is not listed as an action item, but as I anticipate as we go forward and working with CSAN and other stakeholders that are paying close attention to the legislative session, I anticipate that I may list some action items so that this board can give us direction on whether to oppose or support a bill. One of the ways, though, that I've looked at these bills is, many of the bills, of course, most of the bills affect our schools. And CSAN, I think, is taking the lead in either opposing those or supporting those. And I'm not sure whether this board or this agency, how into the weeds we want to get in regard to bills that affect our schools. Now, from this agency's position, if there's a bill that affects this agency, that's where I would anticipate taking a position on a bill.
Yeah, let's flag BDR 34-392, because if I understand what they're conceiving of, it would add some responsibility to us and require us to do some things that we haven't done in the past, when it comes to online schools. And I'd like our board to weigh in on that once there's actual language to look at. So we'll flag that one as one for potential action in the future, just so we can, get some board direction on how we want to approach that. I know CCN has done a lot of work to develop that bill since last summer, but as I say, the devil's always in the details, and so we want to make sure we're comfortable with the details as they're proposed.
And I believe there's a stakeholder group that's been, as you said, working on that bill since last summer, and so I would anticipate, again, my understanding is that bill, there is language at the LCB right now, but once that bill becomes published, maybe members of that stakeholder group can present to the board, as well as I'd be happy to give staff's thoughts on what that bill actually looks like. Because again, what I understand that bill is doing is creating a separate accountability framework, or at least the regulatory authority to do that. And so as you said, I'm not sure whether our students getting driver's license at 14 is a major concern to this board, but if the SPCSA is going to have a separate framework or oversight role in regard to a subsection of schools, that I would think would be very important.
This is Member McAdam for the record. I think you're right. We're going to see a big bill dump in the next 10 days, and we're probably not going to have a board meeting again before this bill gets heard. So I think we just have to have an understanding that our staff is going to have to probably take a stand on this before we have a full board meeting again. I just think we have to have that understanding, because it's very likely the timeline isn't going to work out for us to convene a board meeting to discuss it. So
yeah, that's actually an excellent point. And so I want that to sink in for board members is as these bills come out, our staff's going to have to make some evaluations, and maybe what the staff can do is just report to us, you know, as things come up. But, you know, and if we have to have an emergency board meeting because it's that important, maybe we can do like a telephonic meeting. I know the open meeting law allows for some of that sort of some of those sorts of things when there are unexpected issues that need to be addressed. So maybe we can look into that. And then I would say with regard to that bill, the thing that excites me most, whether we get a bill, you know, whether CSAN's successful or not, I think from an authority perspective, two messages. One message and then one question that I want the legislature to hear is, one, we've done a lot of accountability work when it comes to virtual schools, and I think we've done it with some success. And so having an additional tool in our toolbox to be able to continue that work, I think would be helpful. But then number two, I think the legislature has to struggle with whether virtual schools where virtual schools fit within the education portfolio of our state. We know from our experience in holding virtual schools accountable that virtual schools work very well for some kids, but not all kids. And the question for the legislature is, you know, if this is truly a public school option that only works well for a certain segment of our student population, is it acceptable to allow them to serve that student population well and create rules that allow them to do that? Or is our expectation that they figure out a way to serve all students well, and if they can't, to eliminate them from our education portfolio? And I think that's really a legislative question. That's not an authority question. All we can do is apply the law as written, and that's what we've been doing as we've struggled with the accountability of virtual schools. But I think the legislature really needs to wrestle with where do virtuals fit and how should they be regulated.
And I do want to talk about the accountability issue because, again, that's primary part of my job, and I don't think that story does get told enough, Mr. Chair. And again, we have 4 virtual charter schools in our portfolio. Beacon, which is a blended program, and as you know, they're under the alternative performance framework, and every metric except one, I believe, under that alternative, they're a 1-star school under the NSPF, but every metric under the alternative performance framework from the last meeting or 2 meetings ago is trending in the right direction. Second school, I believe, is Leadership, I think, and I think they're a 3-star school, and again, they're a small online school in Las Vegas. The third school is Nevada Virtual Academy, and as you know, their elementary school will close at the end of this school year due to accountability actions, and the new renewed contract that they're under sets specific benchmarks and targets for their middle and high school. And then the third school, or the fourth school, is Nevada Connections Academy, and they are operating under a amended charter contract that was entered into in 2017 that sets specific benchmarks, especially in regard to their high school, which they are currently meeting, at least in regard to their graduation rate. Their high school was a 1-star school last year, as was their middle and elementary school. But as you know, that school, Nevada Connections Academy, comes up for renewal next fall, and their charter expires at the end of next school year. So when you talk about our virtual schools, I think, you know, every opportunity we can take to tell the accountability story, I think, is important. Nevada Virtual's high school had a graduation rate of 73, 67. It actually made a significant jump, as did Nevada Connections. They're only at 63, but that's up from, I believe, 44% graduation rate the year before. So the story regarding our virtual schools, the accountability, and what they're actually doing when you talk about Beacon and Leadership, I think is important.
Yeah, thank you for that. Any questions or comments from any board member?
Mr. Chair, Member Kerner here.
Yes, please.
Mr. Herrick, are you or would you or could you add AB 136 to your list? AB 136 has been presented, and this is a bill that would require charter schools to pay prevailing wages for any kind of construction. It seems to me that unless it's coupled with facility support, it would be an unreasonable burden on many of our charter schools. So I think I don't know that we need to take a position on it, but it seems to me that that's something we should be following.
So Member Kerner, Ryan Herrick again. I have AB 136, also AB 180, and AB 219. And 219 relates to English language learners and some provisions there. So again, I do have sort of a running list. And again, working with our friends at CCN, I think we can, make sure we're up to date on what's going on with these bills that will specifically affect our schools.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from any board member? All right. Well, Mr. Herrick, thank you for that report. Okay. That'll close agenda item number 5. Why don't we take a 5-minute restroom break, and then we'll proceed to finish the rest of the agenda before the noon hour. All right, well, let's go ahead and call the meeting back to order. We'll go ahead and open up agenda item number 6. This is the agenda item dealing with the amendment process presentation, where staff will give a presentation regarding the process by which a school's charter is amended. Director Moderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the authority. This presentation has been a long time coming because staff, for reasons you will hear more about in detail, and our schools have felt that the process can be updated so as to improve our work, make it more efficient, and hopefully lead to stronger, more robust recommendations for you all. So I'm hopeful that you'll find this information to be helpful, as we have 2 application windows each year. We have one that is has notices of intent that are due right around this time, with the amendment applications coming due April 1 through 15. And then we also have one in the fall where notices of intent are due September 1st, with amendments coming due the October 1 through 15. So we do this twice a year. It does require some manpower in order to provide those recommendations. So we're hopeful you will be pleased with this process. And I'm going to actually ask Mr. Peltier, who really leads this work very well and is familiar with a lot of the nuances and what this has looked like in the past, to give you all an overview of the new process that you'll see moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Moderson, Board, Authority Chair. My name's Danny Peltier, Management Analyst serving on the authorizer team. And this morning we're going to go ahead and go through the charter amendment process and some of the proposed changes. We're going to go through the current timeline, the current process, and the proposed amendment process. As Director Moderson just said, we do have 2 cycles, the fall and the spring cycle. The letter of intent is due between September 1st and September 15, with the charter amendment application due October 1 through October 15th. The spring cycle here is the letter of intent is due March 1 through March 15, and the amendment application is due April 1st through April 15th. Charter schools also have an opportunity to submit amendments outside of the amendment application window if they can show good cause via a letter voted on and approved by the charter school board and submitted to the SPCSA along with the amendment application. Some of you may recall that many of these good cause amendment application that we receive are bond issues and things where timelines are kind of outside the current application window. So that's kind of one of the things that we've seen regarding good cause exemptions. Currently, we have 11 different amendment applications. You can see on the screen here, we have amendments to occupy additional sites, amendments to relocate, occupy a temporary facility, add a dual credit, distance ed. So there's quite a few different amendments, and many of these applications have been created in response to a request to amend the charter, because schools, when amendments were originally thought out, we didn't have all the foresight of everything that the authority would receive. So throughout the last few years, you've seen these amendment applications grow and grow, which has become a bit difficult to update each year because we're kind of stuck aligning 11 separate applications, and it can be very time consuming. Some of the things also that we've seen issues with this many applications is it's causing confusion for our charter schools when they're trying to decide which application to complete. You have additional enrollment amendments, but then you also have facility amendments. And so is the facility amendment, is the enrollment amendment? There's just been issues with that. A lot of our applications have been built off of previous amendment applications, and what we're seeing is that some of these applications are asking for information from the schools that's not really germane to the amendment request, which is then burdening both the school and SPCSA staff and taking more time for staff to review and for schools to submit, because you have an amendment application to add a dual enrollment program or something to existing grades at the existing facility, but yet we're still asking for facility type things, and so it kind of just slows down the process for everyone involved. So with the background of the timeline and the current process, we're proposing to change the amendment process slightly. So one of the things that we're proposing is to streamline the 11 amendment applications into one amendment application. This application will be broken down into different sections such as facility, enrollment, and academic. Those three sections were chosen here because those are the vast majority of amendment applications that we receive, whether it's additional facilities, expansion of enrollment, or the addition of, a dual credit program or a distance education program that would fall under the academic section. So what the staff will do is, based on the proposed amendment via the letter of intent, due 45 days before the application is due, the SPCSA will determine, based on that letter, which sections in the combined application that the charter school will be required to fill out, and hopefully that will streamline the process and take away some of the confusion for the schools and allow staff to get the details that we need to review the amendment application thoroughly, but also quickly enough to get it in front of the authority board. This is going to benefit the charter schools, again, like I said, by clarifying exactly what SPCSA staff expects in amendment applications, and then also streamlining the amendment process to focus on the proposed actual changes as opposed to non-relevant information. It's going to benefit the SPCSA staff because we're going to be receiving more targeted amendment applications from schools, which will allow SPCSA staff to be more efficient in evaluating the proposals. It's also going to reduce the time it takes to update all these different applications and get them posted on the website. Another thing not listed here is that it will also help the authority have a better idea of the proposed amendment changes that they're hearing, so that they're actually hearing the information that they want to hear. The stuff that will be posted online will be information that you guys will be able to go through quickly, but also, get to the key aspects of what the proposed charter amendment is. So some of the things that we're not going to be changing is there's still going to be 2 cycles for amendments, both the winter and the fall and the spring. Schools will still be able to submit good cause exemption letters when the application window does not match their schedule. And SPCSA staff still expects amendment applications to be high quality and will determine approvals of amendment applications based on that quality. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that the authority members may have.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I had one other comment, if I may. I wanted the authority to also hear that we would not make such a change to our process without working with folks in the field, school leaders, and the general reaction from school leaders about this has been, I never thought that you would say that. That would be a tremendous help. And so I just wanted the authority to know that when we look at a change like this in process, we do work with the school leaders to understand, is this going to help both parties, and will it be a welcome change? And the answer has been an overwhelming yes. And I just want for the record to reflect that, because I think it's going to help everyone involved, from staff to the leaders to you all.
Yeah, thank you for that, Director Moderson. I think on at least 3 occasions in different meetings, Vice Chair McAdam and I have said, if no school can complete the application correctly, and I don't think in my tenure that I've ever seen a application that did everything it was supposed to do, then there might be something wrong with our application and not with the people completing it. And so the idea that, the fact that you have responded to a significant concern and are addressing it in a substantive way is important. And, I read all the stuff that you guys provide, whether it's the application for a new charter school or the amendment application, and nothing frustrates me more than to have questions and responses to those questions that I'm reading that don't have any real bearing on the ultimate decision that we have to make, So I'm glad that you're going to be looking at those things and just focusing on asking questions that are material to the decision we have to make. And then on the other end, I'm just expecting schools to understand that the questions we ask are very important and that they probably need to give complete answers, because I know that's another form of frustration I've had, is that we'll have a question that's presented and we'll get some sort of amorphous, generalized answer that doesn't help me understand what they're doing and why the application should be approved. So appreciate the work you're doing in that regard. Is there any other board member with a comment or a question on what's been presented?
Mr. Chair, this is Member Moulton. Just a question, as I was reviewing that, who on staff will determine where the targeted amendment is laid or asked? Which one of you fine individuals?
So Mark Moderson, for the record, thank you for that question, Member Moulton. So our intent is to look at the notices and have hopefully communication before the notice deadline with schools. If it's an academic, a curricular change, or perhaps a grade configuration change, that will primarily fall to the academic team under the authorizing unit, so Dr. Ozdemir and Ms. Kinney right now. And then things related to facilities, changes in transportation, we've heard some of those before. There's a number of things that Mr. Peltier went over, operational or financial. Those will fall to Mr. Dang and Mr. Peltier, and there may be some overlap in between. Mr. Dang will be tasked with providing those recommendations to the board, but we will leverage the expertise where appropriate, and if need be, we also may turn to, as we continue to refine this process, external reviewers. That is a best practice. Traditionally, we only use external reviewers for new charter applications, but that there's an opportunity to use them for this as well.
Thank you.
Vice Chair McAdoo.
Melissa McAdoo, for the record. So I just have a quick question. I love this, first of all, yay. Second of all, I guess my question is, it's the new application isn't actually formed yet, or I guess here's my thing. We're like, the deadline to start turning these in is like 20 days away, and school leaders want to do a good job. I personally have one that I need to do, and I want to do a good job, and I want to answer the questions thoroughly, but with only 20 days to go to get it done when we're in the middle of a legislation period, I mean, it's just going to be really tight. So what's our plan for this upcoming cycle? Are we going to it's going to be a one-off and we're going to wing it, or is it, and that's fine if that's the answer, I think that's fine, or are we going to extend the deadline, or how is that going to play out with it approaching so quickly?
Thank you for that question, Member McAdoo. We have been proactively working with schools who have expressed an interest in this window. I would also note that we definitely are going to be substance over form. So if a new form creates a issue, we're not going to say, well, oh my gosh, you missed it too late. So we can definitely work with the school to make sure that those amendments are captured. And I also would say that for the most part, I believe the form questions are not changing. We just felt like the number of questions and the volume was far too great for what a school was actually looking to do. So we're happy to work with anyone throughout this process initially, so that everyone understands where the expectations are and they're not unduly penalized for a change in the mechanics of the process, if that helps.
Great. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, hearing none, thanks for the work you all are doing on this, and I think it's going to be a great benefit to our schools and to us and the work we do. I think it'll streamline the work and make it more concise and less unwieldy than maybe it has been in the past, so appreciate the good work you're doing. That'll close agenda item number 6. We'll go ahead and update or move to agenda item number 7, the strategic plan update. This will be the time when staff will provide the authority board with a presentation regarding the process by which the SPCSA's strategic plan will be updated over the coming months. Director Moderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the authority. So this is really going to be a very brief presentation, and hopefully we will receive some discussion along the strategic plan. As you are aware, the strategic plan is set to expire in 2020. So we definitely have time on our side right now, but that will come sooner rather than later. And there are 4 goals outlined in the strategic plan: open and sustain quality schools that reflect the demographics of their community, maintain an unwavering commitment to high quality schools, ensure the fulfillment of public school obligations, and facilitate a community of practice among operators to cultivate cultivate innovation and collaboration. I really wanted to just remind the board of those tenets and then hopefully have a conversation today about what the board envisions this process looking like over the next 15 months or so. I think we would ideally, as a staff, like to have a strategic plan go into effect perhaps July 1 of 2020, so we do have some time. Of course, we will work with the incoming executive director, hopefully their name soon, throughout this process so that we have all of our bases covered. But I think there are a number of ways to evolve or adapt or modify a strategic plan. I believe previously when this was done, it was done in over a number of public meetings, public board meetings, which of course is one way. We could also perhaps talk about community workshops where various board members are present, working with the community and other stakeholders in a very hands-on manner. And there are definitely other ways to do it as well. So I don't think staff has a preference other than to, as a reminder, say that this is going to be upon us before we know it. And I think it would be in all of our best interest to take an appropriate amount of time over the next 15 months to make sure that we're all comfortable with the plan. It says what we want it to say and really has us honing in on the mission and the vision of the authority. So I would love any discussion or recommendations or ideas that members may have on how they'd like to see this process unfold while time is on our side.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this to our attention, and I think our next executive director certainly should have some input into how we do this work. But from my perspective, I think we should pick a 6-month window, and at the beginning of the 6-month window, we as a board should have a full-day retreat that's just focused on strategic plan, reviewing what we have, reviewing the progress that we've had to date, and then setting some priorities for what we want our strategic plan to look like going forward. And then after we've done that work, then for the month 2, 3, and 4, and maybe 5, put the board's thoughts and considerations out to our stakeholders for review and input, so that we can get as much input from the folks who will be affected by our strategic objectives as we can. And then in month 6, come back for maybe a half-day retreat or maybe a full-day retreat to finalize the work that we've done, both as a board and then with regard to outreach to our stakeholders, and finalize what we think our new strategic plan should look like at the end of that period. I think if we take it in bites like that, it'll allow us to be thoughtful and deliberative and have a strategic plan that's meaningful, that we've all bought into, not just as board members, but also our stakeholders can buy into it as well and know, from meeting to meeting what we're trying to accomplish and why we make the decisions we make. Because ideally, we would want to align our decision-making processes and outcomes with the goals and objectives we lay out in our strategic framework. Vice Chair McAdam.
Melissa McAdam for the record. I agree with everything Jason said. The one thing, though, that I would like to see before like a day-long workshop is if CellCheck or somebody could report out early on the measures that we had and how we've done, because sometimes I always find this with like our school improvement plan, you're at the end, you're like, well, that was a problematic measure. Why were we even talking about that? And so if we could just get like, because when I'm reading them, I know we've made progress in some, and in some I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot we even talked about worrying about that. So it would just give us time to kind of think, were those good measures and we should have kept the eye on the ball a little better, or were they, not important? So if we could get like our progress to date on those, it would give us enough runway time to kind of think about it.
Yeah, I agree with that observation, and I'd also say, a member Luna did some legwork on board evaluation. Maybe when we do the workshop piece of this, maybe we could kick it off with a board evaluation based on the information that Member Luna was able to gather on how to appropriately do that, because part of evaluating the strategic plan, I think, is evaluating the performance of the board related to that plan, and so that might be a good use of our time as well.
Mr. Chair, Member Moulton, for the record, and I agree with all of those suggestions. I think they're excellent. The other thing I'd like to look at is the Department of Education, their strategic plan, and any other body in the state that may relate to some of the things that we're doing, just as we could personally look at those.
Yeah, that's an excellent suggestion, so that we can align our goals and objectives with what the state has articulated and make sure we're all rowing in the same direction. And I think, what's going to really impact our strategic plan over the coming years is the LEA discussion that we've been having and how we step into our LEA role and what that looks like. And then if the ASD becomes a part of the SPCSA, I think a lot of the work that we're doing with the neighborhood option schools will be a big part of the work that we do going forward as well. And so in any event, I think what Member Moulton suggested about looking at the state's strategic plan is very important. But I'd like to emphasize that the work that we have our consultants doing with regard to the rollout of the LEA, I know a lot of that staff-specific suggestions, the reporting that they're doing, but we should consider, how we bring some of that information that the consultants are doing into our strategic thinking going forward, so that we can plan out a process that allows us to step into that role and do it at a high level over the next couple years. Yes, please, Mr. Herrick.
Ryan Herrick, just a couple of quick comments. I made some comments earlier about growth and addition of seats and kind of what I talked about, the inherent growth. And so, one of the major pieces of the strategic plan is number of seats. And so I just want the board to kind of keep that in the back of their mind, that within 2 years, without approving any new schools, will be almost 50,000 students. So just when you're, part of the strategic plan deals with the numbers. So when you're thinking about that, the other thought that I wanted to raise is on Friday, 5 very highly qualified, high quality candidates interviewed for the executive director position for the board, and as part of those interviews, they were asked, where they see the authority in 3 years, and if the board would like, staff would be happy to go back through those comments. And I know Director Moderson talked about doubling our free and reduced lunch population, increasing our 4- and 5-star schools from 50% to, I think it was 75 or 85%. But I think the board certainly wouldn't have to adopt any of those, but I think, those 5 candidates laid out some specific identifiable, 3-year goals that could be at least considered by the board as part of the strategic plan. And the last piece I'll say, just because personal interest of me, a big focus of those interviews, or part of the focus, was location. Where are our schools going to be, and where can we put our schools to serve the best, to be in the best position to serve the students that need it. And SPCSA staff has been in conversation with Clark County School District regarding this issue of opening lines of communication, where our schools are going to be located, and that type of thing. And so, from my own point of view, I'd hope that again, as you talked about, Chair Guanasso, growth for growth's sake shouldn't be a goal, and neither should just opening schools for opening school's sake, but to take a strategic look at where those schools are being, whether it's in northern Nevada, the rurals, or serving historically underserved areas in Las Vegas.
Yeah, Yes, absolutely. Excellent suggestions, and definitely, I think we need to incorporate what we learned from our candidates and make that a part of our discussion. So if staff would go through what we heard and pick out some of the ideas that were presented with regard to a vision for the SPCSA over the next 3 years, I think that would be very useful to our discussion once it begins, our strategic planning discussion. And I think it's a 6-month discussion. And again, I think if we take it into bites where we have a big meeting to begin with to lay everything out, and then several small meetings to get stakeholder input, and then a concluding meeting to codify everything that we've learned and discussed, I think we'll come up with a very high quality document that's meaningful and can be applied going forward. So, any other comments or questions with regard to the strategic planning process and some of the things that we're going to want to consider?
Mr. Chair, Member Moulton, again, just a quick comment. I so agree with what Ryan has just stated about those candidates and what they stated. And I'm thinking in my own mind and contemplating, and we'll continue to ponder how bold we really want to be. When you get into percentages and those kinds of things, I think it lays it out, and those are bold statements, and you may take critique on it, but it's certainly, when I look at data, when I see how specific it is, I know that drives student achievement, and that perhaps we will decide to be bold in our strategic plan. Thank you.
Excellent. Any other comments or questions? All right, hearing none, we'll go ahead and close agenda item number 7 and move to agenda item number 8, which is our long-range board calendar. Probably ties in pretty nicely with what we just discussed. Where do we want to put our strategic planning sessions in this long-range calendar? Or would staff like to give it some thought and come back with some suggestions next meeting on how to schedule this all out, given the other work that I know staff is in the middle of?
Mr. Chair, this is Member Moulton. Just for a quick update, personally, I have conflicts with our meeting in April and again in July. FYI, I've talked to staff a little bit about it, that I can be on for probably a short phone period, but those days I will be absent.
You said April, and which other date? I'm sorry. July. In
July, we have it's scheduled on Friday the 26th, I believe, and I'll be out of state on both those events.
Okay. Mark, this is Ryan. I know today will be short. We've had a couple of short meetings, but I know we're going to have some longer meetings coming up with amendment recommendations, the NSPF stuff in the fall. So I don't know if whatever we do with the retreat, which it sounds like that'll be partially board self-evaluation, and then the beginning of the strategic plan, how we want to build that around the longer meetings that we have coming up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Herrick, and Mr. Chair, to your question. I think we'll obviously defer some of this to the incoming executive director, but I do think that we can certainly put it in the parking lot as in pencil for now, and then perhaps my recommendation right now would be to probably have this come up maybe again in June or July, and that should give, I think, staff enough time to begin to formulate and gather the data that Vice Chair McAdam spoke of about where we are now compared to the goals that were previously set, and maybe give you all a chance to think about this moving forward. And then I think Mr. Herrick is right that April and May, I think, will be lengthier agendas as compared to the last couple of meetings. June could be lengthy as well, but then when I look at July and August, it could be a little bit lighter, and that may be the ideal time to have a step back conversation. So we'll add it to the parking lot, I think, and then we'll go from there based upon the upcoming work.
Okay, let's go ahead and do that then, put it in the parking lot. With regard to the April meeting, since Member Moulton will be absent. Let's just make sure we have a quorum for that meeting. I'm sure we do. I haven't heard any other board members say they're not going to be available for the April meeting. But let's make sure that we confirm that with, particularly with the board members who are not here. Member Corbett and who else are we missing today? Member Hinton. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, just for a second. Brian Scroggins for the record. And you're probably aware of that. That week just happens to be spring break week for the Clark County School District at least. And so I don't know if that'll impact Mr. Hinton or anyway.
April 19th. Is that right?
Yeah, spring break's 15th through the 19th of April.
All right. And so staff could just confirm with those two individuals whether they're going to be here or not for that meeting. That would be helpful. Right now, if Member Moulton is not available, then we have 4 board members who will be available for that. It looks like myself, Vice Chair McAdin, Member Luna, and Member Kerner. So we have a quorum, but barely. So let's make sure we've got confirmation on whether those two are going to attend. If not, we may need to explore another date, but let's find out what their availability is and just make sure. And if we don't have to move the meeting, I'd prefer not to. But if we have to, then we have to.
So we will certainly do. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to make one other comment. I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. We'll look into that. The second item I wanted to state, thank you, Mr. Kerner, is that we are in the process of moving facilities down here in the south. And so right now, all signals point to the April meeting being held in the current location at the Department of Ed. But the May 31st meeting, as of right now, would be the first meeting held at our new facility, which is, I think, Burnham and Tropicana. We'll certainly keep you all apprised of that, but this would be the last meeting in April where it would be held at NDE.
The new location will be a shared space between us and NDE as well, right? Or is that just going to be our space alone?
Yes, that's correct.
Perfect. Well,
shared, yes.
Awesome. Yeah, so give us an update next month when we get together in April. Let us know how the move is going and whether we should plan on the new, because if we're going to be in the new space in May, maybe we can do a little reception the night before or do something to, I don't know, celebrate the move or whatever. So I usually have a housewarming when you do something like that, but I'm not sure if you do that for an office, but in any event, it's any opportunity to get together and celebrate something is always a welcome opportunity in my book. So yeah, please.
I have 2 quick items. You mentioned as part of CellCheck's presentation on the changes to the NSPF. The way we currently have it set up is in July, I was going to give a presentation regarding how we do our accountability measures in regard to the statutory requirements as well as under our intervention ladder, and that presentation was going to be in July. And then August, we were going to do CellCheck's NSPF primer, which we did last year, and then in September was the actual results, and we may end up moving that to October because, as you know, we want to make those recommendations as quickly as we can. But when those results come out on September 15th, that's a quick turnaround, and those are obviously important decisions, so we may move that to October. But do you want to move both the accountability and the NSPF primer up earlier? You kind of mentioned that today.
You know, based on how we've got it calendared, if we're going to move September to October, then maybe what we do is put the primer back a month. So the primer, what you were proposing that gave a presentation on, maybe we do that in August, and then we do the next CellCheck's piece in September, and then results in October. So we'd actually move it back, but the idea would be to, well, how are we going to use it as a tool to inform schools about stuff? So yeah, that's what my point was earlier was.
Yeah, do you want to move it to May or?
Yeah, maybe we should. What do you all think about that? Should we move it to May? I mean, I just want to give the schools the benefit of having at least one other opportunity to understand what's expected of them. So maybe we do move it to May. What do you all think about that?
This is Member McIntyre. I mean, I think it's fine to move it to May, but it ultimately doesn't really matter because the NDE's making these. I mean, in May, you're going to tell them about something that they're responsible for this last school year in May. Right. It doesn't matter. It's already basically too late in that regard. You know what I mean? Yeah. You've tested, you've validated, you've done everything. So it's not really. There's not really a window to I can pivot based on this information and do something different now.
And we won't get the NSPF manual until another couple months, correct?
Actually, such goes in for the record, because of these changes, hopefully we're going to get at the beginning of April.
Well, why don't we just leave the schedule then as is? If moving it up isn't going to help our schools, then we'll just keep the schedule as is, because it makes sense the way you've choreographed it, because it helps us build on knowledge from month to month as we lead up to the results and the accountability that comes with those results.
Mr. Chair, Member Moulton, and I'm looking to our expert in this, and that's Member McAdin. Would it be helpful to do it, though, in preparation for the 1920 school year? I just asked that, not that I really know, but sometimes they do a lot of work during the summer and prep for the coming year. Maybe not.
I don't think so, because the information that we got in the spring of last year, they're changing the NSPF. I mean, and like Dr. Osmer said, they're minor changes, but they're going to do that every year. And so I think as long as we make sure that the schools get the handbook, and like maybe we talked about, like, here's the highlights you might want to know about, but really in April, when we get that handback, it's too late to pivot and make a change. The testing window's already open. The school year's basically done. So, which is kind of the criticism, right? Like, you get this information after you've already done all your work for the year. So I don't really think it matters. I do think getting it to the schools in April as soon as the handbook comes out and making sure they're aware that, hey, here's a new handbook, here's the highlights, is important, but it's not going to put schools in a position to change what they're doing.
Mr. Chair, Brian Scroggins, just one other thing, and maybe Member McAdin can vouch for this, but I believe that the CSAN conference is scheduled for September 26th and 27th, and we have a board meeting scheduled for September 27th. So for our long-range planning, maybe we would look at changing that date, because if that is the date CSAN conference is, we normally have our staff there. It's a good opportunity to work with the member schools and to have training. So just a thought.
Yeah, can we put that in the calendar, the CSAN conference that's in September, and then make sure we resolve any conflicts with our meeting in that? And then I think there's a national conference coming to Vegas in June, and I think the first day of it is June 28th, and so I don't suggest changing our meeting in that regard, but I think we should be mindful of the fact that we have this national conference in Las Vegas, and we should plan on attending as board members if your schedule will allow. We'll all be down there. We'll all be together on the 28th, and so we should be able to take advantage of that conference while it's in Vegas. If not the first day, that definitely the second and third day. So.
And this is Melissa McAdin. That conference actually doesn't technically start until the 30th, so it's the 30th, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. So there is some pre-conference stuff going on, but the actual kickoff and opening plenary and all that is on the 30th.
So did y'all get those changes to the calendar? Yep. Okay. So just put those on and we'll get this fixed. Any other changes or things we should know about as we plan our calendar going forward? All right, hearing none, we'll go ahead and close that agenda item. All right, we will open up public comment once again. Final public comment period. Is any public comment in Las Vegas?
None here, sir.
Okay, and doesn't appear to be any public comment here either, so we'll close agenda item number 9, and we will adjourn. Thank you all for your time and your good work over these last 2 meetings. Appreciate your commitment to the work we're doing, and look forward to seeing you again in April.
Brian, do you have the dates for the August and September meeting? Because for whatever reason, I don't think I do. But if I thought I'd looked on it. Okay, I've got that. That's August 30, okay. September 27th. November 1. Okay, yeah, I had those, but I don't know why I didn't have those. Yeah, okay, charter school. Okay, and September 27th. Okay.
Can you ask them to send me a calendar?